you can, if you're still listening in, you can make the meeting live and just let us know when it is.
Absolutely, you're live now, all set.
Okay, great, thanks so much. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Conservation Commission meeting, July 9th, 2020. My name is Heather Charles List, and I'm the chair of the commission. This meeting is being held remotely in accordance with the Town of Braintree's temporary emergency policy for remote participation under the open meeting law pursuant to Massachusetts Executive Order of March 12, 2020. The town is using Zoom software for this meeting. The information for joining the meeting by audio or video was posted with the agenda on the town's website, along with the web link for accessing plans and other materials relevant to items on the agenda. These materials will be available throughout the meeting for participants to view or download from the website. And in addition, conservation staff or consultants may share their screens to show these materials during the meeting. In accordance with the open meeting law and the Town of Braintree's policy, this meeting is being recorded by the town. And if any participant wishes to record the meeting, please notify me now so that I may inform all other participants. And the record should show that no participants expressed a wish to record the meeting. So for commissioners, in accordance with the Town of Braintree's guidance for remote meetings, roll call votes must be taken on all matters requiring a vote. For clarity, as I did the last time, I'll make the motions in cases where I would normally offer up that I would accept a particular motion, but you, of course, as commissioners are welcome to make motions at any time as well. We'll now begin our agenda with public hearings under the State Wetlands Protection Act and the local Braintree Wetlands Bylaw. Please be advised that under Chapter 53 of the Acts of 2020, statutory timelines for the permitting process have been suspended or tolled and are now extended 45 days after the COVID-19 state of emergency. While we are permitted under this order to suspend our business until the order is lifted, the Conservation Commission, in consultation with conservation staff, has decided to continue processing applications and holding public hearings remotely, and we're attempting to follow the normal statutory and regulatory deadlines to the extent possible under the current conditions. So for each hearing, I will first ask the applicant and a representative to present their project. Then staff and the commission may comment or ask questions. And finally, I will invite any members of the public who wish to comment to do so. Following the discussion, the commission will determine how to proceed. Please note that for any permits that are voted on, the original decisions will be issued and mailed to the applicants, but there will be a time lag as commission members will need time to sign before the decisions are mailed after the meeting. And last, for all participants, including commissioners, please state your full name and affiliation or address if you wish for the record when you first speak. Okay, the first hearing is a request for determination of applicability. This is a continued public hearing for 70 Alita Road. The applicant is the Morrises. And are the Morrises on the line?
They
Yes,
are.
John and Kathleen.
Good evening, welcome. So we will, if you have anything new to add since our last meeting, I'll be happy. You know, we always sort of start with the applicant, or we can just get into our conversation. I know we have some things to follow up on. Is there anything that you'd like to say first?
Nothing new to add, really.
Okay. Okay, no problem. Thank you. So commissioners, to refresh your memory, we have this sort of two aspects to what's in front of us. One is the application for the above ground pool, and then somewhat unrelated, during the course of the permitting, it was learned that a shed, a retaining wall, and a portion of the landscape part of the yard is actually over the property line into the town-owned conservation land, the Cedar Swamp at the back. And so we continued the hearing to figure out some options and decide how we wanted to proceed. Kelly, I know you sent some emails around. I'll come to you first. Do you want to give, just for anyone who may not have seen it or wasn't here last time, will you give us a little summary of what you heard from town council? I know you spoke to them again, sent emails.
Yeah.
I think that would be helpful. And we can handle this in any order that people prefer. Previously, we had tried to start with the encroachment issue since we didn't really have a lot of questions about the pool. So I'm suggesting that we do that again. But certainly we'll talk about the pool as well. So Kelly, if you can help, that would be great.
Someone suggested the possibility of a land swap at the last meeting, but I confirmed with the assistant town solicitor that given Article 97, that would just be excessive. I mean, it takes an act of the state legislature to convert conservation land. So that doesn't not seem like a realistic option in this case. We talked a little further about other options, and legally, there's not a lot we can do to legitimize something on conservation land. It's just, there's no adverse possession, there's no ability to give an easement, so we are kind of at an impasse.
Okay, thank you for the update. It's still helpful. So do commissioners want to weigh in on this? I did make a site visit. I don't know if others did too. Maybe we could start with that, with any observations from site visits.
I visited the property and I saw the, in back of the house, it's just lawn and very neat. And then there was a fence in back of the house, and then it's undeveloped back of the house after the fence.
That's helpful. Thank you, Diane. That's helpful. I observed the same thing. So I did also have a chance to talk to John, the owner, and I really appreciate John's time, and just, we didn't, of course, make any decisions, but we just talked a little bit about, what was there. And so the shed is, we all know that the shed is partially over the property line. The other two man-made aspects that are over the property line are the retaining wall. And it's not a huge retaining wall, but it is a significant slope. I think it would be challenging to take that out and, have the area remain stable. And then there's a low fence that runs along the top of the retaining wall that extends into the town-owned land too. And then as Dan said, there's like some plantings. I don't think it's actually that much lawn, which is nice, that is actually over the line. I also observed a significant amount of yard waste that's been put over the fence. And so, John and I talked about whether he might be willing to remove, at least some of that material, clean up the area a little bit, and he was amenable to that. Maybe just there's some man-made trash and debris. Some of it is just, beyond their property, but I welcomed him to clean up any of that if he wanted to. So I think I guess I'll just state my opinion, and then I want to hear from everyone, but I don't think that it would be reasonable to force them to take the retaining wall out. I just think the topography alone would make it really challenging. I mean, we could do that, but I think that would be very burdensome in terms of keeping the property stable, and something else. You couldn't just take it out and just leave it alone. You have to do something else back there. I've wrestled with the question of the shed, and I can't see a way that we could allow it. As Kelly said, land swap is not possible. Realistically, it's just not possible. And then considering like an MOU like we've done in the past, the commissioners will remember there was another property there where there was an encroachment issue, and we did an MOU, but that was a very different scenario where it was not as difficult to sort of make some sort of boundary showing where the line is, and it was a conservation restriction. It wasn't town-owned land, and I think that is a really large distinction. I'm not sure if there's even a legal mechanism that we could sort of make some sort of agreement. So my opinion is that, I'm very sensitive to the fact that it is, it's not ideal. I feel badly about the situation. I'm sorry that the Morrises are stuck in this position, but my opinion would be that we should require the shed to be moved or taken off of the property. I know there's not a lot of room to move it. There may be room for a smaller shed on the property, I think, but, and then, do some little restoration plantings or seeding back in that area. The final piece I didn't comment on is the fence. And, I briefly talked to John, like, is there any feasibility of moving the fence over, like move the fence to the property line? But I could go either way on that one, frankly. It would be lovely to just have the property line clearly marked, but I don't think there's as much benefit in that. A fence on top of the retaining wall doesn't have as much impact as a shed where it would otherwise be vegetated. But perhaps if the shed was removed, even if the fence wasn't moved, perhaps it could be a little extension across, where the property line is. So at least in the future, there wouldn't be like a future encroachment So for what it's worth, those are my initial thoughts and observations on the site visit, and I welcome input from anyone else.
Go ahead. Hello?
Hi, this is John. I just thought that,
Go ahead, John.
yeah, just on that. Whereas we're already at a getting up there in cost. And if we do have to move the shed, we can't move the shed. We're not going to move the shed. So I think the only option would be to get rid of it. Now, being it, most of it is on town land, would the town be able to remove the shed?
So this is Heather again. I don't think that the town has any sort of funding, set aside for this sort of activity. It's not typically handled in that way, unfortunately, for you. Usually when there's an encroachment, any monetary, aspect of it is handled by, whoever is encroaching. And I understand that this predates your purchase of the property, but I've never heard of it being handled in a different way. Even if the town wanted to, I just don't think that there's like a pot of money available for this, unfortunately. If you have anything different to say than that, Kelly, feel free, but I'm pretty confident of that. I mean, having said that, I would be willing to have some flexibility with the timeline. I don't think, it's been there a long time, assuming other commissioners agree with me, of course. I don't feel like it needs to come out tomorrow or even next month, but I think it would be something that would, need to be, so could be planned for a bit.
Right, considering it's been there for 20 years so far, and we didn't even know there was a problem with it being there since we only bought the house, almost 6 years ago, right? So we didn't build it there. We had no idea when we bought the house we would ever run into these sorts of issues. And now, we go for a pool permit and we're finding out that all these things are in our yard or on the town's land, and it's going to cost us thousands and thousands of dollars to tear down, buy a new shed, and not to mention everything that's in it. Where would that all go? So, I mean, at this point, the town has no funds, but neither do we to do all this work and replace it with a smaller shed. So timeline-wise, I think should be very flexible considering, this just happened to us unexpectedly. And clearly we're not getting the pool anytime soon as it is because the summer's over, and this would be like a next year project at this point. But, I think it should be pretty flexible with the shed time-wise.
And if I could just interject too.
Is this
Yeah.
John again?
That's John, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
If we remove the shed, then there comes I'm guessing we're gonna need to put up a fence. Now, I know in our discussion, you would ask if maybe we can do a survey to get the exact plot line, for the fence. And, we just paid, $1,500–$1,800 for a survey to be done. Now, does the town have an exact plot line for the land, for their own land? Or I'm just trying to look for ways to minimize the cost and, come to a better solution,
Sure. On that, I don't know what sources of information the town has. I can tell you that, the commission, we can all kind of discuss this, but, it may be that we could allow you to just approximate the line. It's sort of pretty clear. There are set things that are already surveyed onto the plan, the patio, which is clearly visible on the site, and the shed. And we can, we could measure off essentially where the property line crosses at the corner and the side of the shed and sort of approximate it from there. If the rest of the commission was comfortable with that, I could tell you that I would be comfortable with that. Just given what is in the surrounding area, and provided that Kelly would be comfortable with kind of confirming that on the site. So there's a lot of ifs there, but I'm throwing out another possibility.
Yeah.
We have had a case in the past where we, similar, where we debated this exact question, knowing that survey work is expensive. And a lot of, it's just very site specific. We were able to do something like that in another case where there was an estimation of that line and some markers put up. I'd like to hear from other commissioners. Any
This is
opinions on this?
Kim Crowa. I agree. I think that we could be flexible with the time frame for removal and flexible as far as using the survey to take a look at it. But I don't see any way around enforcing having the shed removed based on where it is and our obligation to maintain conservation land.
Isn't it a zoning issue with the
Thank you.
property also, that would it be a non-conforming lot with the shed?
Peter, can you just, well, can you state your name for the record?
This is Peter Williams, Conservation.
Thank you.
Commissioner. I would think that, you know, there may be a zoning issue with this also.
Kelly, do you want to comment on that?
Or there is a zoning issue. There's a 30-foot buffer to the open space zone, and so they actually need a special permit from the planning board for the pool to have anything in that zone. But it makes it very awkward to go and ask for that, but then have the shed actually over the line in the zone. So it would create a problem. Planning board.
So this issue would come up again, in other words.
Yeah.
What issue is that? What issue is that exactly? I'm sorry, it's Kathleen Morris.
The issue with the need for the special permit from the planning board because you're in the buffer to the open space zoning district.
Right. So you're saying you have to settle the shed part before the pool part, basically?
Well, I think they would expect that, or
Yeah.
they would have a hard time kind of dealing with the shed when it's over into the zone.
Right.
Thanks for the information, Kelly.
This is Joyce Albrecht. I
Peter,
have a question.
Joyce, yes, go ahead.
I have a question on if it is an issue, if that's going to be an issue with the zoning board, are they going to have an issue with us extending, longer timeline for them to remove it, or they're just going to be interested that we've given them some direction as to, what they have to do with the shed? Do you have any feel for that?
Kelly, you can, I don't, so I'll let you answer.
Yeah, I've talked to staff about it. I can't answer for them. So I think if we make a kind of a reasonable plan, then I think that would be considered favorably.
Do any commissioners have a suggestion for what a reasonable timeline would be?
I would suggest 9 months if they're considering doing it in the summer next year. I would assume that would be probably a spring project.
That seems reasonable.
I'm sorry, I missed who said that.
Oh, sorry, that was Kim Crowa.
Oh, Kim. Sorry, I can't see all the faces. I thought it was your voice, but it's harder than you think to navigate back and forth. I'm sorry.
No worries.
So 9 months you were suggesting.
Right.
Okay.
Mhm.
That seems reasonable to me.
It's reasonable to me.
We don't need another plan, do
I think
we?
if the zoning is a problem, and if you give them some time to plan for what the zoning is a problem.
Okay. Okay.
This is Peter Williams. I would say regarding the survey, I mean, we have a stamp plan and they could take some offsets from the corner of the house and locate the corner of the lot and then work from there on the fence. It probably would be close enough in this case. Because we do
Yeah,
have,
I see the plan does show, oh, it's not to the lot corner, but there is the offset from the house to the shed.
you can just take an offset, measure the offset to the property, how many feet perpendicular from the house, and then
Yep.
locate that point and work the property line from there. The fence would be close enough.
Do you even need a
Yeah.
fence?
Okay. So it sounds like commissioners are generally in agreement on taking this approach. So I think, why don't we, unless somebody has anything to add on the, let me just ask that first. Does anybody have anything to add on the encroachment, any commissioners, before we move on to the discussion of the pool? And I think we'll probably need a vote. But I would suggest that we sort of finish our entire discussion first. Okay, so why don't we talk about the pool then? I don't have any questions in my notes from the last time specifically about the pool, except for just related that I had wanted to see the proposed deck on the plans. And we don't have that information yet. But that was the only other thing I had. Does anybody else have any other follow-up questions or concerns about the pool that haven't been addressed?
An above ground pool?
Yes.
Yes.
Because it's round.
Okay,
The other
so
question, this is Peter.
Peter.
I mean, what was the issue? Was there an issue with the backwash, filter backwash?
yeah, Morris, is if you would like to answer because I admit I can't recall what filtration was going to be used.
Yeah, I looked at it and initially it's a cartridge filter. And from my understanding, having a sand filter years ago, cartridge filters are a lot better where the need for backwashing, they're saying, is not needed. You basically take out the cartridges and you clean the cartridges. And as far as the pool, we don't plan on reducing the water level in the pool. We just want to keep that water level as it is. So I guess from reading about the type of cartridge, it's a black diamond cartridge filter. They're saying there's no backwashing needed. So it's more or less cleaning out the cartridges.
Yep.
Okay.
You just replace the cartridges. This is Peter.
Yes.
Okay, good question. So Kelly has prepared
I'm sorry.
some draft conditions for the pool if the commission feels comfortable moving forward. I don't see any reason I understand the pool may not happen right away, but if we issue a decision, it would be valid for 3 years. So I feel like we could move forward with that permit and some sort of a vote on the shed. But let me just stop and ask if there are any members of the public that would like to comment, because this is a public hearing, at least under our bylaw.
Give me just a minute to make sure
Sure.
I recognize all the names that are here as attendees, and I believe they're here for other business, but I'm going to quickly unmute everyone and make sure no one
Sounds good.
I can. No, I'm not hearing any comment. Any comment on 70 Lita Road pool?
How are they going to fill the pool?
Diane, will you ask that question again?
Yes, I wondered how they were going to fill the pool.
Morris, feel free to answer that one.
I'm sorry, we got
The
the
question is, are you
letter
gonna
from
fill
the
it?
water. I'm sorry, say that
So the
again.
question was how you were going to fill the pool.
Well, with part of the permit for the pool that we submitted to the building department, we had to get a letter from the Dalton Water. I think it was, we got it from, and they have that as part of the permit application from the water company. And that's how we planned on filling it.
Okay.
Just that the lot is very compact. I guess they have a long hose, I guess.
They usually do, actually.
Okay. Great. Thank you. So if there's nothing else on Alita, I'm going to suggest that we move forward. Kelly has sent around some draft. Actually, did they
No.
just come to me, Kelly?
Yeah, because it was so
Okay.
late, last minute today that, yeah.
So
And I actually haven't sent them to the Morrises either, but
Okay.
I can read them.
Yes, that, if you just give me a moment, I'm just attempting to. Mild technical difficulty on my end, but I think I've got it under control now. Okay. Again, this is a problem of too many windows open on the computer. I'm trying to navigate. Okay. Does anyone want to make any other comment on the pool aspect of the project before I read these draft conditions for a potential motion? Okay.
No.
I'll go ahead and read the conditions then. 1, prior to the start of work, the proposed deck shall be added to the plan. 2, prior to the start of work, a $1,000 as-built guarantee shall be provided to ensure the receipt of an as-built plan upon completion of the project. The guarantee will be refunded upon completion of the project in accordance with the approved plan. 3, erosion control consisting of a 12-inch silt sock shall be staked in place between the edge of the work area and the shrub/fence line. 4, prior to the start of work, staff shall be contacted to verify installation of the erosion control and the shrub planting. And 5, the project shall be constructed in accordance with the approved plan. Variations may be subject to additional review by the commission. So any questions or comments on that?
This is Peter. Can we get in the record what the dimensions of the deck is to be? That's it.
Sure. Am I correct that it's 6 feet by 9 feet?
Correct.
Okay. So maybe condition 1 could be, prior to the start of work, the proposed 6 foot by 9 foot deck shall be added to the plan.
Yes.
Good idea. I actually have a question on the 4th condition, which was staff contact to verify installation of the erosion control and the shrub planting. Maybe I'm missing something, but are shrub plantings proposed as part of the project?
No, that's probably a residual from a different
Left over?
project. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe just strike that, and it would just end with staff shall be contacted to verify installation of the erosion control, period. Okay.
Also, I don't think silt sock is necessary, and it's such a minor excavation, so we could probably put in straw wattle to make it easier.
Sure, erosion control, we could give perhaps you could give the option.
Yeah.
Erosion control consisting of a 12-inch straw wattle or a 12-inch silt sock shall be staked, and then etc. Okay, anything else? Okay, then I will go ahead and make a motion to issue the negative determination of applicability for 70 Alita Road with conditions as drafted and as amended during this discussion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Diane. I will now take a roll call vote. Commissioner Hayward.
Yes, I vote. Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Crowe.
Yay.
Commissioner Albrecht.
Yay.
Commissioner Francis.
Yes.
And Commissioner Williams.
Yay.
Okay. That vote passes unanimously. 6-0-0. Okay. And why don't we now finish our discussion of, or make a motion with regard to the encroachment issue. So I guess now that I've said I would make the motions, I have to do this one as well. Let me just make sure I've got it all straight and we agree before I actually attempt to make this motion. So based on the discussion, we're going to require that the shed be removed from the town of Braintree land. But we will allow the shed we will allow the fence and the retaining wall to remain in place and the landscape bed, and require that a new section of fence be added across the property line from the edge of the shed, to the property line. We didn't talk specifics about mitigation. My thought was to require a handful of native shrubs and then seeding with like a wildlife seed mix, something along those lines. If anyone disagrees, speak up, or if I've missed anything, let me know. Okay. not hearing-
Would that be a plan to be approved by the Conservation Office?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Right. So we don't have to specify exactly which they could, and the Morses would have a little control over, if there was some shrub they liked, as long as it's native.
Sure.
That sounds good to me. All right. So I will make a motion to require the property owners of 70 Alita Road to remove the shed that is currently encroaching into the town of Braintree conservation land, and to do so within 9 months from today, and further to extend the existing fence or a new section of fence along the property line from the edge of the shed to the property line along the eastern edge of the property. Further, the commission will allow the existing fence and retaining wall to remain. And the owners are also required to remove as much of the yard waste and man-made debris that is on the other side of the fence as feasible. And finally, to plant as many native shrubs as can reasonably fit in the area where the shed is to be removed, with the remaining area to be seeded with a conservation wildlife seed mix. And the planting plan shall be approved in advance by conservation staff.
Can I have a discussion on that?
I think that's it. Yes.
Can we give them a number of plants? I mean, number of shrubs, just a rough number.
Okay. Let's see.
You saw the area.
Maybe. Yeah. Maybe 6 or 8. I'm trying to like quickly estimate how many feet on center this is. So the shed is the pool is proposed to be 24 feet across. So the shed is
About 20.
maybe 20, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. So if we had shrubs, maybe 5 feet on center,
So it's like 4 or 5.
8. I'm thinking like 6 to 8, something like that. We could say 8, and then if it's if it's just not reasonable to fit them in based on the shrubs that are chosen.
Then we can say a maximum of 8.
Yeah, with a minimum, maybe we should say a minimum of 6 to be safe, because I feel confident that 6 could fit
Okay.
that area. With a minimum of 6, just amend the shrub part with a minimum of 6 native shrubs, no cultivars or invasive species. Okay, is there a second?
Second.
And who made the second?
I did, Diane.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Francis. Any further discussion?
Yeah, this is John. Could I, these shrubs, we're gonna have to,
John,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you to hold off for a moment, just so that we'll finish our vote, and then we can answer the question. No problem.
Okay.
So I'll now take I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. Usually the further discussion is amongst the commission. So now I'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Hayward.
Yay.
Okay, Commissioner Crowe,
Aye.
Commissioner Albrecht,
Yay.
and Commissioner Williams.
Yay.
Okay, that is unanimous, 6-0-0. And yes, John, you had a question.
Yeah, I mean, you're requiring us to plant shrubs at a cost to us, right? Is that what I'm getting?
Yes, the idea is to restore that area so it's vegetated again. Because once you take the shed out, presumably it's just going to be bare dirt there. So that'll allow it to kind of bounce back and have more habitat value. But we'll give you a choice over some decision over what goes in there, since obviously you're going to be seeing it. But yes, that would be the idea. We didn't may have a minimum size requirement. So that may help with the expense, and you could certainly, you know, there's no requirement that you have a professional do. You could do plant them yourself. But yes is the short answer.
So we have to tear down the shed and replant the shrubs by 9 months from today?
Yes.
And what if we don't get that done on time?
So I think to some extent we'll cross that bridge if we come to that. There's not like a set procedure in cases like this. When we're talking about regulatory things like permits under the Wetlands Protection Act, there are very clear, you know, sort of steps that we can take. You know, our goal is to work with you and just ultimately see that the town conservation land, you know, remains as it's intended, which is, you know, preserved for a conservation purpose. So, you know, if you're, for example, if you were making a good faith effort over the next 9 months to do the work and it just couldn't get done for some reason out of your control, I can't imagine that. Personally, I wouldn't feel the need to do any penalties as long as you were sort of working towards that goal.
Right.
You know, but I would say if you think that you can't do it in that time frame, to stay in communication. The commission can always discuss the issue again, and you know.
Yeah, right.
And-
Only because, sorry, that shed, like he said, it is at least 20 feet. I mean, if you took a look in it, you would believe me, it's got things inside it that need to be put somewhere.
Yes, I
where,
can imagine.
and not only that, to tear that down, remove it at a huge expense,
I
lose
understand.
out on all that space, put up
So,
a fence, put up
all I
shrubs.
can say is this, that, you know, it's very unfortunate when you're in this situation, you know, you come into it not even realizing that there's an issue. Unfortunately, it happens sometimes. So you're not the only one, and sometimes this is how it comes up, where there's a permit. Otherwise, you know, we don't always know about these things. But then when we find them, we have an obligation to take some sort of action. And there's also a bit of a precedent where, you know, I'm sure there's other encroachments in town, and we have to be kind of consistent and with how we respond to things. So, so yes, that was the decision. But stay in communication with Kelly. You know, we do want to try to work with you, you know, to resolve the issue. And with that, I guess I will make a motion, unless there's anything further to add from anyone. Okay, I'll make a motion to close the hearing for 70 Alita Road. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Francis. I'll now take a roll call vote. Commissioner Hayward,
Yay.
Commissioner Crowe,
Okay.
Commissioner Albrecht,
Yay.
Commissioner Williams.
Yay.
Okay, that is unanimous again, 6-0-0. Thank you to the Morrises and all for your cooperation. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening. So now we'll move on to our next public hearing, a request for determination of applicability for 60 Albee Drive. The applicant is Bo. They have requested to continue to our next meeting on September 3rd. I assume that request came in writing, Kelly?
It did.
Okay, so then we don't need a vote on that, and we can just move on to our next item. Now we have a notice of intent, DEP file number 8-681. The location is Gordon Road, Watson Park, and the applicant is the town of Braintree. We have two notice of intent for the same locus. The first one is for the bank and salt marsh work. And I will turn it over to the representative to present to us.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Elise Leduc. I'm a coastal scientist with Woods Hole Group, and I'll be representing the town of Braintree for this and the following application. This, I guess, would be up to the commission. Kelly and I had talked about it beforehand, whether it would make sense to open both hearings and talk about them as a sort of a single conversation, but up to the commission whether you think that is more or less confusing.
Okay, commissioners? Any strong opinions on that?
I would recommend doing them together just for the big picture and the background are the same for both.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm fine with that. So then I'm just going to read off the other one as well. So we're also opening the hearing for the notice of intent for DEP file number 8-682. Again, Gordon Road, Watson Park is the location. The applicant is town of Braintree, and for this one, the work is for the berm and rain gardens. And I would suggest that to some extent, we take them one at a time once we get to the discussion of the actual projects and how to move forward. But I agree. I think it would be very helpful to have the background all be together. And
Perfect.
we'll have
Because
questions.
it is one site and it was envisioned as a single project, and it's just because of the nuances of the permitting world that we've split it into two pieces for this notice of intent application process.
Great. Thank
Kelly,
you for the suggestion.
Oh, great. Oh my goodness. Hold on one second.
No problem.
I have a bit of a dog problem right now. He's been outside for the whole time the other people were talking. So I think, would it be okay if I shared my screen at this point? Because I have some photos that I think might help illustrate both the site as well as what we're proposing.
I would be fine with that. Kelly, can you allow that to happen?
Yeah, actually, I think Stephen is allowing that. Are you able to share with Elise, or do you need?
Yep, I think I can. So you should be able to see my screen at this point.
Yep.
Great. So I just wanted to start with a little bit of, really quickly, a background of how we got to where we are right now and why we're proposing what we are proposing. This all started back in 2018. Kelly and the town of Braintree looked at Watson Park and saw some of the ongoing issues that were happening there, including ongoing erosion, which during a fiscal year 2019 coastal resiliency grant, we actually looked at the problems at the site as well as some feasibility assessments as to what we could do to curtail those problems. Erosion and flooding being two of the biggest concerns. You can see in the center of the park, so all the ball fields are here, Gordon Road is up here, and the Ware River is at the bottom of this figure. These sections where the purple line is really far from the red line indicate an area where the salt marsh has eroded significantly since 1969, which was the farthest back year we went, and in some cases on the order of 2 to 3 feet per year, if you were to put that into an average rate. These photos at the bottom were taken during the March 2018 storm, where the entire park was flooded when the Ware River overtopped its banks. So in addition, I'm sorry?
The Fore River.
Fore River, sorry. Weymouth Fore River. I had a W in my head. So in addition to erosion and flooding, looking forward, the question was also, well, what is the future of this park? What is sea level rise going to do to the water levels in this river? Currently, the present day mean high water is at 4.8 feet, NAVD 88. That's expected under a high sea level rise scenario to rise to 5.8 feet by 2030 and 8.36 feet by 2070. The important part of this number is that most of the playing field surface within the park is at about 8 feet today. That means that the prospect of the salt marsh migrating landward is not likely until sea levels reach this level. So thinking on the order of approximately the 2070 timeframe. So while it's in the long range plan to allow that to happen, what can we do to protect the park from flooding in the short term? And that's part of where part of our proposal came from, was stopping short-term flooding with the idea of helping long-term salt marsh migration. So just to walk you through, I'm hoping many of you have seen the site. It's a really unique area. I'm not sure how many of you have actually walked out into the intertidal area and seen it from the water rather than from up behind the fence. But I want to just walk through what some of the resource areas actually look like. What you're seeing here are various views of the coastal beach and tidal flat. Off to the western or upstream section of the site, the coastal beach is very rocky, very firm, lots of cobble and large stones. As you move farther downstream towards the east, this becomes much siltier, muddier, softer, much more difficult to walk on. Closer to the actual seawall that the path runs along on the ball field side of the wall, there's an old mound of peat. This shelf actually indicates a recent extent of where the salt marsh extended to, but now is an unvegetated area with a film of algae on it actually. And this is just another view looking downstream. So that's the coastal beach tidal flat. The coastal bank which was one of the main concerns from the town when they first approached Woods Hole Group. There are a couple of sections of significant bank erosion. The bank is not very tall, but where it is eroding, it's causing potential problems for undermining of existing structures and or threatening the walking path and playing field area. So there are a few sections right around the head wall of the existing stormwater outfall that are significantly eroding. And then this photo on the upper left is actually right at the terminus of that stone seawall where the bank is actually cut back behind the location of that wall. The center of the bank, however, as you can see in this lower photo, is fairly well vegetated and fairly stable. Some shrubs, there's even an eastern red cedar growing in the center of it. So there are some portions that are fine, but there are portions on either end that are eroding, and we are proposing to restore and stabilize. This is just a view of the bank from up on the path, which you've probably seen. You can see how close in some cases the erosion is getting to where the walking path is, and how the bank is actually cut back behind the level of the seawall where it is right now. There's also significant salt marsh remaining in this location, more so to the downstream eastern end. There's a very large platform of healthy salt marsh, Spartina alterniflora along the river side of it, and a large platform of mostly Spartina patens across the center. But that portion is significantly scarped and eroded. There's about a 4 or 5 foot drop from the front of this salt marsh area down to the mud flats. And then as you move across the project site, there's only remnant scattered pieces of salt marsh. This center area is mostly sea lavender that's remaining. And then there's some areas of high tide bush with some Disticus and Juncus mixed in along the edges of the wall. But basically as this area erodes, salt marsh is getting pinched. It's basically left with very few areas where the elevation is appropriate for salt marsh vegetation growth and survival. The rest has been eroded too low to allow for salt marsh grasses to persist. There are also 4 lobes that we mapped as rocky intertidal. These rocks are coming out of the beach essentially as the finer grain materials are eroded away over time. Some areas of it, as you can see here, are largely bare rock, while other areas do provide habitat for barnacles, attached macroalgae, and other organisms. There's even a section up by the stormwater outfall where, in addition to some of the outfall walls, stone blocks, there are natural stone material that are actually meeting the definition of boulders in an intertidal area to be rocky intertidal shore. And one of the more lower elevation areas actually had live attached oysters. So this is, there is some significant habitat out there with these areas that we tried our hardest to, we actually did, our footprint avoids these areas almost entirely. And in some cases, we're actually trying to mimic some of these habitats in our project. I would be remiss if I didn't point out the fact that even though we were focused on the coastal bank and the salt marsh restoration, we are faced with a site that has this in the center of it. So we can't put salt marsh back across the entire length of our project area. There are 2 outfall pipes. It's really hard to see the second one. They're both crushed. The wall itself is in a state of disrepair. You can see some of the large stones have actually been pushed out and off of the wall itself. These 2 pipes drain the entire neighborhood behind Gordon Road during storms. All the stormwater comes out these 2 pipes. And then just one more view of the site. In addition to the resource areas I talked about, the entire park is also within an AE flood zone, so is land subject to coastal storm flowage, and 200 feet from the high water line is also falling within the riverfront area. And I did mention the land containing shellfish. We do have oysters as well as some low density areas of soft shell clams. So that's the site as it exists. What we're proposing is actually 4 different components that are broken up into those 2 different applications. The first component is a restoration of the salt marsh areas. We're proposing to place 260 cubic yards of engineered wetland soil to bring, this is a cross section down the site, to bring that elevation up to a point that will support salt marsh vegetation. Right now it's very low due to the erosion, but in order to stabilize the amount of fill that would need to be added, we're proposing a rock sill to stabilize the toe. This will require dredging 86 cubic yards of the coastal beach to create a stable toe for that rock sill. We are proposing two different sections, one on the east and one on the west of the existing stormwater outfall. And in order to minimize the size of this rock sill, both in length and in height, we're actually proposing two different target heights for this portion of the project. The western portion of the project will be built to 4 feet elevation, but on the eastern end of the project, in front of that existing salt marsh platform, because the height is so significant to get up to that 4 feet elevation, we're actually proposing that only to 2.5, which minimizes the face of that rock sill on the river side of it. The salt marsh areas will be planted with a mix of native salt marsh species, including Spartina alterniflora, Spartina patens, as well as Disticus and Juncus. The idea is that by putting in a mix of plants, we can see what's going to survive the best. And if there is low survivability of certain species, we can replace those with the species that are surviving the best as the site is monitored. The head wall itself will remain. We're not proposing to fix anything about the upstream end of the stormwater system, but the part of it that's actually exposed within the project site, we are planning to repair in place. With the differences that we're trying to minimize the front face of the wall by actually stepping down instead of having a solid rectangle. This will minimize wave reflectance during storms moving forward. We're also hoping to replace the very ends of the pipes where they're currently crushed and retrofit them with a check valve or a tide gate. Currently, if the tide were to reach a really high level during a storm, water could actually push back through the stormwater system and percolate up through the storm grates in Gordon Road. By adding a tide gate or a check valve, you basically allow only one-way flow. Water can come out of that pipe, but the tidal water can't go back up into the system. In addition to that, the rocky intertidal zone that's immediately downstream of the current outfall pipes, we're proposing to add additional stones of a similar size and nature as to what's there now to help slow the flow that comes out of that pipe and reduce scour in the future. It's that ongoing scour from both the pipe and boat wakes and storms that's actually removing the fine grained material from this site. So trying to slow down that process as much as we can. We're also proposing, as I mentioned, to stabilize 2 pieces of the coastal bank. Just to sort of orient you here, the end of the seawall is down in this location. The existing stormwater head wall is here in the center. The fence and the walking path run right here. As I mentioned, there are 2 sections. There's one 30-foot section nearest to the existing seawall, and an approximately 60-foot section of coastal bank that's experiencing erosion right now, right around the stormwater head wall. We're proposing to cut that back. If this is the existing ground, we're proposing to cut that back to a stable 3-to-1 slope, install a biodegradable erosion control blanket over it, and plant the surface with a native New England coastal salt-tolerant grass mix. The second application has these second 2 components, but just to walk through them with you now. As I mentioned in talking with the town about what the problems on this site were, in addition to the erosion and the loss of salt marsh and the potential longevity of the salt marsh at this site over the long term, we realized there's also a flooding problem. And that while the baseball field may not be able to persist past 2070 due to new sea levels, in the meantime, it's going to flood at an even more, at a higher frequency than it already floods today. And so to eliminate what would be continued maintenance costs, getting debris off the field, reseeding where grass dies from saltwater, we have proposed putting in an earthen berm along the existing location of the footpath. The footpath would actually run up along the top of the earthen berm. This berm would be built to an elevation of 10 feet, so it's an approximately 2-foot high berm compared to the ground level that is there now, with 3-to-1 side slopes on both sides. The field side of the berm would be planted with a regular lawn grass mix that could be mowed similar to what's on the field side, and people could walk up the berm onto the path if they wanted to, whereas the river side would be planted with a native mix of grasses and plugs of other native species. The path itself would remain impervious using either a crushed shell or a pea stone, so there would be no impervious surfaces added as part of this project. And as mentioned, this design is meant to be temporary. It's meant to buy the fields a little bit more time. It's an earthen berm, so it can be removed simply by reworking that earth and moving that soil back off the site when it gets to the point where the tides can start interacting with the level of the playing fields, and salt marsh would have the opportunity to migrate back on the landscape. In conversations with DEP, they recommended that we permit this as a redevelopment project because it is in the riverfront area, which is why it came before you as a separate permit application, but also that as part of that, it can be permitted that way if we were to improve upon the existing conditions. And because of that, we added in the rain gardens that run along the field side edge of the earthen berm, with the idea that the stormwater that's currently running off the field directly into the river today would be pre-treated. It would help it percolate into the ground and have some treatment prior to discharging into the river. These rain gardens would be right off the edge of the slope on the field side of the berm. They would be planted with a mix of native plants, and there would be an overflow pipe within them. So minor regular storms would percolate directly through the soil. Any larger storm, rather than overflowing the rain basin, would go into this pipe, run along a collector drain, and would ultimately connect into the existing stormwater outfall pipe. And I think that is what we were proposing in a nutshell. There are some questions that Kelly raised in her report that I believe you folks probably received a copy of as well. One thing I would like to point out, and we can talk about this in more detail, we were unaware when we designed the project that there is an existing rain garden on the river side of the splash pad. This figure is a little confusing, but it's basically a clip of the previous splash pad plan, semi-transparent and overlaid over our plan of where our berm would be, and where the green area overlays this little kidney-shaped area that is the existing rain garden. We were thinking of ways that we could redesign the project based on input from the commission, whether it would make more sense to turn it early and connect into the higher elevations on the side of the splash pad, avoiding the rain garden entirely, or to make it slightly more narrow, running in front of the rain garden and connecting into the higher elevations on the eastern side of the splash pad. There's pluses and minuses to both methods. Running it to the west of the splash pad actually leaves a small flood pathway on this side of the splash pad, so potentially undermining what we're proposing to do with the berm in the first place. However, running this in front of the rain garden would require cutting back some of the existing woody vegetation. It would also need to be slightly more narrow in order to fit with the least amount of impact to that vegetation. And we'd have to figure out how to deal with the overflow pipe from the existing rain garden. So this is something that only came to our attention recently, and I will answer any additional questions you have about it, and or we can talk about what those options might mean. And I guess the final thing I would say before I open it up to questions is, Kelly, I know you had a number of questions and comments in your report. I'm happy to go through those, or you can bring them up one by one. And we can cover them as you see fit.
Okay. Thank you very much, Elise, for the thorough background and overview of both projects. Okay, so I will say that ordinarily we do go through Kelly's questions first, and which I think inevitably we'll raise other questions as we go because they cover a large breadth of the project. So if that's okay with the commission, I suggest that we do that as a starting point and just start with the first one that was on our agenda, salt marsh restoration and the shoreline stabilization. Sound good to the commission? Okay.
Yes.
And then if you think of a question that's sort of related along the way, of course, just jump in. But I think this will get us right into the discussion. So the first thing that I noticed that was a question as I went through the memo was on page 4. Kelly was showing the table from the Ecological Restoration Limited Project checklist, which thank you for doing that in advance. And on page 4, I see more discussion is needed on the magnitude and significance of the benefits of the project and extent to which the project avoids and minimizes impacts and utilizes best management practices such as erosion control and construction sequencing. So I think the discussion in particular is with regard to the fact that there's no erosion control proposed, as work will be done between the tide cycles, so just how that construction would actually unfold.
Yeah, so it's a little tricky because all of the salt marsh restoration work is actually below the high tide line. Construction can only take place during each low tide, and any silt sock or anything like that you put out there would just be inundated and water would come up and over it every time there was a high tide. There was a brief discussion about potentially using a floating silt curtain that would come up like a boom at every high tide with a curtain that came down to the water line. We'd be happy to include that if the commission felt it was necessary. I, in practice, think it may actually cause more harm than good. Given the tide range of the area, it could slump down 10 feet in either direction every time the tide went down because it needs that much leeway to come up every time. Because we are planning to build this in phases, basically, they're only going to build the component that they can build in that low tide cycle. There's not going to be a lot of loose material in the intertidal area. They will dredge the portion of the sill footprint that can be completed within a single low tide cycle and then build that portion of the sill. So you're removing that material and placing rock. The rock isn't going to be causing any turbidity because it's a larger grain size material. And then none of the salt marsh fill will actually be placed into the salt marsh restoration area until that whole rock sill is built to contain it. So because the whole project is going to be built from the riverside landward, sill and then salt marsh and then bank and then berm, it's sort of the best practice we could come up with to minimize disturbance to the intertidal area. So no dredging will be done underwater. It will all be done in the dry. And as little loose material will be placed in the site as possible. But we'd be happy to consider any additional recommendations the commission had.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful. Does anyone have any specifics that they'd like to
Peter.
share on that? Peter, please.
Yeah, I mean, what Elise has described is basically the standard of practice for all coastal seawall and revetment projects. That is, you only do what you can in a day's work and you contain and limit the damage and then have a storm emergency plan as part of your contract documents in case you do have a storm come in where you can tie things together and minimize any disturbance of the completed work or erosion of adjacent areas. I mean, that is the standard of practice.
Great, thank you. That excuse me, that's really helpful. I'm going to sort of interrupt the flow of Kelly's comments here. Just as something that I was going to mention later, but I'm just going to bring it up now. So as this was filed as sort of more of a procedural comment or / information for the commission. So since this was filed as an ecological restoration notice of intent, we would need to make a finding that we believe that it is an ecological restoration, and then we would issue an ecological restoration order of conditions. So when that order is issued, there are no special conditions. the regs actually lay out the conditions that you have to include. And they're very similar to the standard conditions that DEP has us include on every order. But the idea being that if the project is being filed as an ecological restoration notice of intent, that the proposal and the plans that are approved should contain everything required to protect the resource areas. And so the only special condition that you include is basically a condition referencing the plan and the narrative and everything that you're approving. And then maybe, although I'm not declaring this, a condition about some long-term operations and maintenance. That's it. And I just dealt with one of these recently, and I confirmed that all with DEP. So the reason why I wanted to bring it up now is because as we talk about some details, all of these details should be in the narrative that we ultimately approve. So for example, at least Peter just mentioned the storm emergency plan. I think that sounds very reasonable to me. So I think where ordinarily we might condition that the contractor shall provide a storm emergency plan, we can't do that. So the narrative should be updated to say the contractor will provide that. And then by approving the plan, we're essentially approving that. It could say approved in advance by the commission if people want to do that. Does anyone have any questions on that? Does that make sense?
I have a question.
Sure.
Under local bylaw, we couldn't put in
Yes.
place some.
Thank you. I forgot. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, exactly. So under the local bylaw, indeed, we could add our own conditions. For just simplicity, I would say, we probably just want to have as much as possible in the plan and narrative that we're approving, but absolutely we could have others. And maybe we decide that we want to, that typically those would be for things that wouldn't be covered by the act, like an as-built guarantee or something that we can't specifically require under the act. But anyways, yeah. So just a little side note, but I found it a little confusing when I just dealt with it, so it was good to get it up front. Okay, so unless I've missed anything, Kelly, I'm moving on to page 6 where the bulk of the comments and questions start, and we'll try to go through them relatively quickly, but obviously taking the time we need to cover them. So the first one is that clarification on conversion of the coastal beach. NOI notes that there's 6,498 square feet of coastal beach that will be lost or converted. We know 4,398 square feet is being converted to salt marsh that's being restored. So what's that remaining 2,100 square feet becoming?
Yeah, so I can show you and also give you the numbers. So hopefully you can still see my screen or see it again. I reshared it. So of that 6,498 square feet of coastal beach that's being converted, 4,398 of it will be restored as salt marsh. And that is the total of the area in both restoration lobes. The additional 1,366 square feet is actually from the front half of the sill. So it's a little tricky to see. I'm going to try to zoom in even more so I can describe this to you. But at the crest of the sill, these lines going forwards and backwards are the sill slopes itself. The salt marsh restoration will actually come to the middle of the sill. So this portion back here will be buried with fill and will be planted with grass. But this front portion is the front facing slope. And so it does take up space. And so that additional 1,366 square feet is from the sill footprint.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
Yep.
It's a lot of detail on this plan. So
Yes.
good to be able to zoom in and share the screen. Okay, the second question, and commissioners, I'm trying to keep things moving, but just jump in if you have a question and I don't quite hear you. Feel free to just speak up. You can unmute yourselves or the whole time or whenever you want to say something. So 2, clarification on the time of year work. The time of year that work will be done should be provided. So Division of Marine Fisheries is not requiring a time of year restriction. The ordinary window to stay out of is February 15th to September 1st, but it may make sense to do the salt marsh plantings in the spring rather than the winter, the early spring. And by the way, I completely agree with that. So Elise, if you have further comments and responses to that would be great.
Absolutely. So when I apologize, this is a little bit of a version error. So we had assumed all the way through based on some initial conversations with DMF that we may receive a time of year restriction. So we had written that into all of our original documents. when we got the confirmation from DMF that we would not be required to do that, that portion was not removed from that particular section. I believe it's only in the performance standards section where that language still exists and not in the construction description where we had removed it. So in my mind, there is no time of year restriction with regards to impacts to the river. I do believe, although it hasn't been discussed, that the recreation department would probably not like this to happen in the middle of the summer because the baseball fields would become sort of a staging and construction site. So Kelly's absolutely right that the work on the salt marsh would benefit from being done in the spring where the plants would have time to establish and not be planted out there in February where they're sort of in a harsh condition. But that how late can you go versus how early does the baseball season start, I think is what's really going to drive the construction window. I don't anticipate that this would take place in June because folks are going to want to be out using the fields, but hopefully in the March, early April timeframe was when I think that would be the highest success for the salt marsh plants. And even though this particular application is just the salt marsh and the coastal bank, as I mentioned, the entire process here is meant to be built from the river landward. So the bank shouldn't be restored until the salt marsh is completed and planted, and the berm shouldn't be built until the coastal bank is restored, because you don't want to be driving over pieces that you've already fixed with the next part that you're constructing. So depending on when the salt marsh, based on consultation with the recreation department and other departments in town, depending on when that happens, everything else is slightly pushed back from that. But the salt marsh work is probably the bulk of the work. The coastal bank and the earthen berm are actually would not take as long to build because it's a lot simpler. You're not restricted by the tides.
Okay. Thank you. That is really helpful. So I think in this case it would make sense to just revise the narrative to be consistent throughout. But with such a lengthy and detailed narrative and background material, I think we can forgive you one discrepancy.
I hope there was just one. I feel pretty proud of that, actually.
Really? Okay, so moving on to number 3. So the narrative talks about the salt marsh restoration being constructed in segments, which you were just describing. And Kelly makes the comment that a very detailed construction timeline will need to be provided by the contractor prior to the start of work. So again, this is going to be, I just wanted to add to this that this would be another situation where I think the narrative should specifically state that the contractor shall provide a detailed construction timeline to the, in advance for review and to the Conservation Commission for review and approval.
I think we can definitely do that.
Yeah, so wherever it's appropriate to fit it in. Again, ordinarily we'd probably just condition it, but in this case we cannot. Okay, so number 4, is sort of a similar. Staging and stockpiling areas should be considered. Short-term stockpiling in the floodplain may be necessary, but it should be well managed and protected by erosion control, and location of the staging area will need to be identified with input from the Recreation Department. Do you have any better sense at this point, at least, of where those would be? Can they be put on the plan, or can more detail be added into the narrative in some way?
I think I would like to talk to folks from the Recreation Department to see where they would prefer that we do this. But assuming we can do that, say next week, I can't see why we couldn't add that to the plan. I think based on some of the comments that are coming and the questions that are coming, I think there's going to have to be some minor edits to these plans anyway before you approve them. Hopefully you approve them. So we can definitely add where the construction access and where the staging area would likely be to the plans.
Great, that sounds good to me. Okay, moving on, there are a few other comments. So implementation of the maintenance and monitoring plan will be the responsibility of the town with assistance from hired consultants as necessary. And I realize as I'm reading this that this is not actually a question, simply that will be the case. And I think, I just read this language today, I believe we may be able to add a condition specific to the long-term maintenance and operations. I'm not 100% sure, but certainly the intention is that that would be essentially conditioned. So I think that's laid out fairly well in the plan. The other point was that a significant factor in the erosion of the salt marsh appears to be from boat wakes, and discussion of this issue with the harbor master and Braintree Yacht Club is needed. That sounds very reasonable to me. Kelly or Elise, do you have a sense of how that may progress, or whether some of that could be discussed during this hearing process?
I think that's up to us, the town, perhaps. A small meeting among, the harbor master and some of the representatives from the Braintree Yacht Club.
And that's the sort of thing that, even if it can't happen, right away, it would be beneficial at any point. So in my mind. Okay, that's all I think in Kelly's memo, unless, Kelly, do you have anything else specific that we've missed?
No.
Okay, other questions or comments from the commission on, well, I guess try to stay focused on the shoreline stabilization and salt marsh restoration portion for the moment.
I have a couple questions, Peter.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, a couple of these things, what I'm going to ask, because I'm just interested about, Elise, do you have any idea if this was maybe the ball fields were way back a salt marsh before and have been filled? Are we talking about that situation here? Any evidence of that?
I believe it's the Army Corps maintains sort of a historic tidelands layer that shows where historic mean high water used to be. And at the time that line was drawn, the ball fields, that landform already existed.
Yeah.
So I don't have anything.
Okay, that's a curiosity.
We don't have anything indicating farther back than that, but it's entirely possible. It's very flat.
Yeah.
And just given how the greater Boston area has been developed, it certainly looks like it has potential to be filled lands. But we don't have any evidence of that directly.
Okay. One other quick question. In your presentation, you mentioned that the backwater prevention is you said it's going to be either a tide gate or check valve. On the plans, I think you have a tide flex check valve.
Yeah, that is what's there. I think that's the engineer who put the plans together. That was his preferred solution. So that's what we're
good. They're very good, but very expensive.
Yeah. So that could be, we could reword the plans to say or equivalent to give the town the flexibility to use a different actual device.
What would you be thinking of with the tide gate? Would that be a check valve or something like that, or?
I would have to ask the engineers. Unfortunately, this is not my not my forte. But if there are things that you're specifically interested in, I can follow up after the hearing.
Okay. I mean, I think the tide flex is the better, more sure product. I guess it's what's the town's budget, but that is a critical part of the project is keep backflows getting behind this. Okay. Actually, right here on the screen that you have up, I understand how you design the sill, and you seem to follow the outline of the historic salt marsh. But on the, are we looking north?
North is up.
North is up, so that would be on the east side. You have a very sharp corner, and it narrows that area where the water can get out. And I think it possibly, Mother Nature likes round, not sharp corners. Maybe round that off a little bit, and it will keep that opening, actually let it open up a little bit and reduce flows during storms, if you can consider that. And then the other thing was on the sill itself, you're filling the voids of the sill, but wouldn't that make more of the front slope of the sill, wouldn't that make more of a solid surface, which would actually cause more wave reflection? And you may not want to do that. Is that essential to the stability of the sill if you leave it as a porous?
Are you talking about this figure here?
Yeah, where you call for fill. you're filling all the stones. So basically then you're gonna have a flat face here.
So
Yeah.
it will be, it is essential that this sill not be porous. Otherwise, what we are putting in to create the fill
Okay.
for the salt marsh would trickle out over time, and you would have a sunken area in the back end.
Mhm.
Our goal for this, although it looks very flat here, is to use stones very similar to what's at the site. So it will be somewhat flattened, but it won't be smooth. It'll be more
You can
natural
make-
rock.
Okay, so you can make the
Yeah.
front face irregular, but have the core stones to keep the fill in. Okay,
Correct. Yeah.
can you make that adjustment? You understand what I'm getting at?
Just make a note that the front face will be an irregular surface, not smooth and
Yes.
flat. Yeah.
Yes. That's it.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Sorry about that. Not the only one with a little interruption on the side. Apologies.
Does yours have 4 legs too?
Only no 2, but of small stature. Okay, thank you, Peter, for all those great questions. And I have a few, but did anyone else want to comment first? Feel free.
I guess I have a question. I'm Chris Hayward from the Conservation Commission. Am I muted? I don't know if I am or not.
I can hear you fine.
Excellent. All right, great. So I'm down at that field an awful lot during the summer months, and we're always telling the little ball players to please stay on this side of the retaining wall. Please don't go over under the bank and all this and that. Will there be any type of signage to let the people know that, you know, what this project's going to be all about, and, you know, kind of stay out of this area? They're always chasing foul balls and everything like that, so things are going to just get crushed after they get planted. So just for a little bit of educational material.
Kelly, do you want to respond to that?
Well, there is a plan to have some educational components, which we haven't nailed down yet. There's also going to be temporary wildlife exclusion fencing around the salt marsh restoration until it gets established. But other than that, we weren't going to fence it off, other than, you know, perhaps putting the split rail fence back up just to discourage people from walking down there. But you think that split rail isn't enough? Like kids would actually go walk on the salt marsh?
We had half of our team the other night. We won a game and they took all their shoes off and went dancing in the mud. So like, guys, come on, get out of there. This is ridiculous. Will you please leave?
Yeah.
I mean, it's tough to control, of course. I was just curious, you know. So, you know, some of the coaches aren't into this type of situation like I am. And so I'm always preaching, guys, stay out of there. But, you know, some folks might not exactly know why this is being done. So
I think education is the answer.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, and we kind of, when we put that fence up, we left a gap deliberately so that there's at least one little place where you can get close to the river, because it's attractive and we want people
Sure.
to appreciate the river and go there. So
Yep.
it's this, I would like for people to be able to go there without trampling the salt marsh. The only place you could really do that would be like around the stormwater outfall.
Right.
But that's kind of the case now, so.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a thought.
Yeah.
Well, I think with the other project, there'll certainly be some discussion of educational signage that may be helpful. I mean, it could be, I sort of hesitate to suggest like more signs, because that's another balancing act too. I mean, there could be like some tiny signs, every you know, a couple on the fence or something sensitive, salt marsh area, please keep off. But I'm not sure that the team is going to stop and look at that sign anyways as they're enthusiastically running down. So
No, not at all.
this made me, I thought of a question though, with regard to the salt marsh, to the goose exclusion fencing. Is that a fairly standard product, or would it make sense to have a detail for that on the plans?
I think it's fairly standard, and it's not intended to be permanent. It just be for the first season until plants were established. But if if a detail was requested by the commission, we could add one. Or at least in the narrative, perhaps point to, a brand or show a photo of an example.
I think in my mind that would be sufficient. Just a little something so that it's sort of obvious what it is. If I always like to have as much detail as possible in here in case there's somebody else down the line, different people involved with the project. Okay, I had a few questions while we're on sort of nitty gritty. On the detailed plan behind the outfall, there's a meadow sort of shown.
Are you on this main plan or are you on one of the details?
I am on the first detail sheet. The
this area here. Yeah.
the outfall, yeah. So it's 1D, the proposed outfall, typical cross section. Yes. So there's loam and seed with the meadow mix, and I didn't see, although I may have missed it, I didn't see a place where a specification was given for the meadow mix.
It probably is not in there. This is a really small area, so I think we were just trying to indicate that we were trying to fill. There's a gap behind the head wall right now. You can stand, in a knee-deep hole behind the existing head wall, and we just wanted to bring that back up to grade and plant it with something native that wasn't lawn grass. But we can add. I would actually probably want to just change this to the same mix that we're planting the bank with, which is what did we call it? A native salt tolerant grass mix.
That sounds good to me. I actually wondered, in part that's why I jumped out at me, because I was like, I wonder what the difference is between this meadow mix and this other area.
I don't think there is. I think there's sometimes a miscommunication between the ecologists and the engineers.
Well, you have such beautiful detailed planting plans for the other areas, so I just being thorough, try to catch every little bit of plants.
Yeah, no, thank you for going through these with such detailed eyes, because again, you give this to, ultimately you give it to a contractor and they're not going to know what it means either. So better to get it right now.
Sounds good. So I also had a question about the where the marsh is being restored. As Peter was also pointing out, where there's a proposed restoration, a lot of it is following along where the base of peat currently is. And I realize the limit of work is the retaining wall. But I see that there's a large base of peat that had, where there was historic marsh, along the retaining wall to the west of the proposed work area, southwest. Was that area excluded simply because of cost and sort of the limit of the project? Just didn't extend that far? Or is there another reason why that wasn't suitable for restoration?
Correct. It's just a matter of scale. I think the more of this coastline you try to restore, obviously the engineering fees are more, the construction fees will obviously be more, the monitoring and maintenance fees will be more for the town. And I think while it would be great to restore salt marsh in front of the entire area, the real impetus for this project in the first place was this one open area beside the wall before you get into that sort of shrubby vegetated area farther down the path where the erosion is evident, and to sort of slow that erosion, protect that coastal bank, and in the process restore some habitat at the same time.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. Hey, I always like to look at what's the most that we could possibly do when there's a restoration.
With more money, you can do the whole thing.
A little pie in the sky, but I just wanted to ask and kind of know what the limitation was.
Yeah. No, we just had to draw the line somewhere. And so we kind of went about an equal distance on both sides of the main core problem area.
Okay, great. That it makes sense. And then I think the last thing I had is that there was a comment, and I didn't unfortunately write this in my notes, whether it was from the ENF certificate, I think that's where it was from, or whether it was from Marine Fisheries comment letter. But in any case, the suggestion came up to put some mats over the existing marsh during construction, and then also to not store any equipment or machinery or materials on the marsh, which seems very straightforward. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't actually, I missed that one. So that's not in my notes that I wrote down for myself. Do you have the actual language? What kind of mats were they proposing?
I don't think that it's specified, but I might be able to just search the document. Fingers crossed that the word mats only comes up once.
Right, it's probably in the middle
Possibly.
of every other word.
Probably. Marine Fisheries does talk about, they just talk about using best management practices such as mats and blankets to minimize turbidity impacts. So that's a little different. Okay, here it is. In the PDF, it's page 130 of the PDF, and I was right the first time. It is in the ENF certificate. It says that DMF recommends that existing salt marsh be covered by mats when accessed during construction. So it's probably just a general comment that they're
so
making.
that's more of so if the only place that this might need to happen is on the eastern end of the project where the existing platform is. So if we have to come out here to construct this, we'll put mats down over this part of the marsh. Yes.
Okay.
The goal is to construct as much of it as possible with a long reach excavator from the actual field. And so you're not actually going to be running equipment down the bank and onto the intertidal area to the extent possible. But this area here is so far from where you can actually park something that we may have to come out just a little bit onto this platform.
Okay, that makes sense. So then I would, as with many other things, I would suggest adding that into the narrative somewhere. And then the last question I had was, and I'm sorry if this was in the narrative and I missed it or have forgotten now, but
it's a long narrative.
It's a long narrative, but I appreciated it. Very interesting as well. So the existing salt marsh is, as you get closer to this outfall, it is very sparse in places. Are there supplemental plantings going in? For the existing in the existing marsh, I mean.
I don't know that we really thought about that. I know we were talking about planting the area that we were putting fill in, but it certainly makes sense to carry those plantings back to the coastal bank where there's bare spaces in between, say the sea lavender individual plants and things like that. Again, it's more cost to the town, but I think you'd end up with a better product because you're buying more plants at that point. But I think to the extent that there are large gaps, that would certainly be useful to do. And I would also say if this is constructed in, say, March or April, those plants aren't even visible. The above ground portion of them have been sort of, it dies back and they get kind of sheared off with the ice and the water. So when you visit this site in the winter, it looks like there is no salt marsh, particularly in this area. If you go back in the summer, obviously you can see the vegetation that's popped back up. But it's likely that during construction, that will all just look like an area to get planted. So I would say, yes, there would be plantings in that area, but we can make that clearer in the narrative.
I think that would be great. I mean, I see it as something that is for the benefit. The cost is not that high.
Compared to the rest of the project.
Exactly.
A couple hundred more plants isn't going to make or break the budget.
Okay, that's all that I had. Anything else from the commission?
Can I ask?
Okay, yes, of course.
I just want to clarify about things being added to the narrative, and because it seems like a contractor would never read through the narrative, but if these are added as notes on the plan, they may be more likely to be easily referenced. So is that what you're meaning, or are you meaning literally in the narrative?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Kelly. I think to the extent that it's possible to put them on the plans, that would be better.
Yeah, Kelly, we can try to do both. It's not hard to add a sentence into our narrative for sure. And if I can just sort of concisely list out some of the major components that we've talked about that would be important for a contractor to see, we can get that as a note somewhere on the plan as well.
Sounds great, thank you. Okay, I realize we're hearing these two together, but I see at least one person has raised their hand, and so it seems like a reasonable time to ask for some see if there's any comments from the public. But I'll just say that I'm referring to comments specifically on this portion of the project, the shoreline stabilization and the salt marsh restoration. So Kelly, if you could unmute folks and we'll see if anyone speaks up.
Yep. Robert Kearns, I think, has a comment.
Okay, Robert, are you, do you want to comment?
Sure. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Robert Kearns, Pilgrim Road. I think that it looks like a nice project, and it's good to see, the crushed shell on the toe, because it may be able to, the oysters may be able, I know Kelly mentioned this before, but be able to grab onto that stuff there. I have some questions about the berm, so I may wait until then. But one other comment is I did look at some historical photos and aerials. It looks like Peter is right, probably right about historically the park was a salt marsh at one time. And then the only other question and comment I had was, would there be access to the beach with this? I know like you have to balance it out, but I have a feeling like, I forget who said it, but that people are going down there and that could be causing some of the erosion. And I remember as a kid when there wasn't even any, there was no fence or anything, and we used to go down there, but I just don't know how you'd balance that necessarily. But I think preserving and restoring the salt marsh is definitely a priority over access, but that was just a question.
Great. Thanks for the information and the question. Lisa or Kelly, if you want to respond in any way, feel free.
I mean, I can just say that we did consider it. It's always, even as a CZM funded project, so CZM funded both the fiscal year 2019 feasibility study as well as the fiscal year 20 finalization of the design and the initial permitting that we're doing for this project.
I'm going to interrupt. I'm sorry to interrupt just for a second, just in case anyone online doesn't know what CZM stands for.
So sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So, well, I'll let you explain.
So it's the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management, and for the past 7 or 8 years, they've had a really wonderful coastal resilience grant program that helps fund projects like this. And the town of Braintree was lucky enough to get a grant 2 years in a row to move this project forward. Coastal access and public access is one of the main goals of CZM, and so it was something we did specifically consider. And with that same concept in mind, how do you balance, not wanting people to walk over your newly planted areas, but still wanting people to be able to enjoy the waterfront? I think what it came down to was the complexity of trying to put in a specific access point. It would need to be ADA accessible, and that gets complicated given the limits of this site. And so I think it became sort of a practicality that it just didn't quite work. How do you get an ADA accessible access from the path down to the water in this location?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I would just say, like, as just a comment, follow-up comment, just it'd be good, like other people have said, to make sure people know not to really walk down there, or if there's like a practical route, if they are, because I think unintended consequence, people may be interested and walk on there and trample things and not really mean it, like Liz have said.
Great, thank you very much for your comments and input. Appreciate it. And I agree. I do think we should talk a little more about educational signage as we go along in this process. Are there any other members of the public that wish to comment on this part of the project?
I'm going to just quickly unmute the
Great.
people here.
And if anyone's on the phone as well.
I don't see anyone else. looking
Okay.
for comment.
Okay, thanks very much, Kelly. So I'm going to suggest that we move on to the other portion of the project. We're not obviously in a position to issue a decision tonight, although in theory, preparing the conditions won't be as painful for Kelly because they'll be rather fairly set in stone. But I think regardless, we'll need to continue this hearing until our next meeting for some of those revisions. But I won't bother making that motion yet because as we discuss the second project, if something else comes up that we forgot or think about for the first project, we could still talk about it in my mind. I'm going to do the same thing and just go through Kelly's questions as usual. I don't think there was anything in the text until we get to page 3 for comments and questions. And this is, of course, on the portion of the project that's the flood protection berm and rain garden. Okay, so the first question is Kelly has been involved in the development of the project, but does have some concerns about the proposed berm, that it will not be removed in the future and that the salt marsh will be prevented from migrating into the park. So despite that concern, the berm is a desirable feature to other town departments and has helped build support for the project. So if it's approved, it should be used as an opportunity for public education on the impacts of sea level rise. Markers and signage indicating tide levels and projected future tide levels and storm levels could be included in the construction of the project. So I guess that's not really a question, it's more of a comment. And I'll just say that I agree that would make a lot of sense. And maybe in light of what we just talked about, maybe there could be some signage, talking about the restored resource areas and why, touching on their interests to the act and why they're important and why they're sensitive and shouldn't be stepped on, that kind of thing. There's some beautiful panels down there. Well, they're rather old, so maybe they're not beautiful anymore, but they're really nice educational panels. Maybe something along that line could work as well. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that right now. Okay, so then I'll move on to the second one. And again, I'm realizing as I go through some of these are just comments, but I think it's worth mentioning them anyways because they are significant. So the work would be happening in land subject to coastal storm flowage, which is a resource area, but it doesn't have performance standards. And so compensatory flood storage is not required. I'm paraphrasing a little bit here. The MACC handbook also says that as well, and it's generally accepted to be significant to interests of storm damage prevention and flood control. So we should avoid negative impacts to those. So it would be reasonable to consider if limiting flooding of the park would worsen flooding in nearby areas because the park is not available to store or absorb floodwaters. I agree with that. This is something to think about. I don't know if any commissioners want to comment on that. Again, I don't think this is really necessarily a question, but at least if there was any study or specific to that aspect, feel free to let us know.
I can comment on that. So
Okay,
in
great.
general, dealing with flooding from a coastal water body is a little different than dealing with flooding from an inland river. When you're dealing with a tidal water body, your flood source is essentially infinite. There's as much water as you could ever push into the system available from the ocean. Therefore, the size of this park is so small that it has no impact on where the water from that tidal river is going to go to with respect to any of the surrounding properties. If this was upstream on a freshwater, non-tidal portion of the river, you could essentially do that, divert the floodwaters to somewhere else. But because it's tidal and the water is actually pushing up from the ocean, you have so much water that the water is going to go wherever it's going to go anyway, regardless of what you do with this park.
Okay, thank you. The ultimate sink, so to speak, with the ocean.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I may,
Helpful. Peter, sure.
This is Peter. It's the water it comes up to a certain elevation and it only floods that elevation. And that's where the water can go to is not the driving force, it's the level out in the ocean. So if the level out in the ocean is only so high, it's only going to fill to those elevations also.
Also very helpful. Thanks, Peter. Okay, I'll move on to the comment 3. So it's worth noting that based on the table in the NOI, which Lisa also showed us, the berm will protect the park from flooding associated with storms up to the 50-year return interval storms, or approximately 2030. This is only 10 years out from today. However, the berm will continue to protect the park from less extreme storms well beyond the 10-year period. I'm sort of intermixing the comments and questions here, but again, if any commissioners want to comment on this, feel free. I can understand this, the return on investment maybe is not quite as high as I think would be ideal for what's being proposed. But I understand that there is an overall benefit down the line. Something to think about. Okay, I will move on to number 4. So, and this is actually a question. So the possibility exists that the berm could be overtopped in an extreme storm event, and then how would water drain back out of the park in this case? It appears that the only outlets to the drain would be through the yard drains and the rain garden. This would take considerable time and potentially create more damage to the park than would occur when floodwaters can quickly recede as they did in 2018. And those are the pictures that Elise showed earlier where it was just water covering the whole park. Can you respond to that in any way, Elise?
I can. So we actually had the engineer do some calculations, assuming the entire park flooded, say a foot deep. How much would it take? And we assumed, we did the calculation a couple different ways. We assumed the entire 18 acres of the property had a foot of water on it, and how long would that 18 acre feet of water essentially take to drain through those pipes. As currently designed, I believe the entire piping system on the existing plans is 6 inches. The vertical yard drains are 6 inches, and then the horizontal pipe that they all drain into that ultimately connects into the existing outfall are 6 inches. After doing that calculation based on this question, we realized that was undersized. By bumping up the size of those pipes to 10 inches, the entire park would take approximately 2 to 2.5 days to drain if you really did have that storm. That's obviously longer than if the berm wasn't there, which could happen at that next low tide. The benefit of the berm is that that flooding is going to happen a lot less frequently than it currently does. So it is a balance. It's something that the commission and the town has to decide if it's worth it. But part of the problem with keeping water out was that at some point you're also keeping water in. And we thought about additional ways to let water out, but it would essentially mean adding additional pipes through the earthen berm itself, creating additional drainage points, which creates new discharge points and permitting issues in and of itself. By able to connecting everything into the existing drain pipe, we are using that existing outfall and avoiding permitting a new discharge point. So we are limited sort of by what can drain out through that existing pipe. So we calculate with minor changes, which we will put on the plan to bring that up to a 10-inch horizontal pipe. The vertical yard drains would remain 6 inches, but that 10-inch pipe would get you down to 2.5 days or so, roughly speaking.
Okay.
Can I ask?
Yeah, Peter, go ahead.
How deep do you assume the flooding?
We assumed that was 1 foot of water over the top. It can't ever be more than 2 feet because it would just drain back over the top of the berm.
Right. And it wasn't the number of inlets that was the constriction, but the connecting pipe?
Yeah, so if you think about the fact that there's maybe 10 of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 vertical yard drains that are all 6 inches that are all draining down into a single 6-inch pipe, you end up with a bottleneck in that horizontal pipe because it can't take the volume from all of those 6-inch pipes at the same flow rate. So by creating a bigger diameter in that horizontal pipe that connects all these rain gardens together, you can take a higher flow. You could go even bigger, but you start running into issues of how much deeper you have to bury, say, a 24-inch pipe, and are you actually going below the level of the existing drainage pipe under the park, and then you're too low to tie into it. So we're sort of constrained by the existing infrastructure a little bit with making it bigger, but it's largely that horizontal pipe that limits the flow given this particular design.
One other question, just looking at it, I just noticed this on the plans, the one we're looking at, you have 2 outlets, but we're showing only 1 pipe coming in from the fields. How does that work?
There's actually 2. There's a drain line here and a drain line here.
Oh, I see now. I see.
Yeah, they're faded.
It's separate. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Missed that.
Nope, that's okay. There's a lot going on on these plans.
Okay, great. Thanks for the detailed response. I think it's helpful because it is a legitimate concern, and as was said, something for the commission to consider. Okay, comment 5 was about the riverfront area and the fact that this could be considered redevelopment. You know, frankly, I've seen the argument made for this sort of project that it could also be considered new development, but in a way, I don't think it matters because I think, you know, you could potentially argue that it could meet either standard. Kelly says the rain guards would be considered an improvement to existing conditions. They would help filter pollutants from stormwater runoff, and the berm and thicker vegetation may help deter Canada geese from the field. So there was a note that DEP file member said that a stormwater report should be provided. And I'm gonna actually comment on this too, because I noticed that the NOI said that it was not subject to the stormwater standards, but it is in the sense that it doesn't fit any of the categories that would allow it to be exempt from it. But I understand that there's no increase in impervious surface. So I think it would be helpful to get that input from DEP. In the past, sometimes the commission has said, well, we don't want a full stormwater report, but you have to at least have like a letter that in a, you know, a sentence for each standard sort of addresses why it's fine and it meets them, you know, that kind of a thing. So there's something on the record. And then the commission can just not require anything else. But if DEP was to chime in and just say, yes, we agree, it really doesn't need this at all, then I wouldn't, then even that step wouldn't be necessary in my mind. Have you heard anything else from DEP, Kelly, or Elise?
Elise has spoken.
Yes, so we originally had a conversation with Greg DeCesare back in February. We talked with him and another woman from DEP, Bernadette, forgetting Bernadette's last name, but she is the DEP stormwater person. And their recommendation at that time was that if we permitted this portion of the project as a redevelopment, as long as we were causing an improvement to the site, which we are through these rain gardens were actually their suggestion to improve the stormwater situation on the site, that because I believe the language is something like you only have to meet the stormwater standards to the maximum extent practical, that given that we're not adding any impervious surface and we are improving the site, that they didn't recommend putting together a full stormwater management plan. And we did confirm that with him last week. So it's still the commission's purview to go ahead and require it. But I would ask that I don't think it's necessary in this case, but it's actually up to the commission. DEP doesn't think it's necessary, but also would defer to the commission because it is your jurisdiction, it is your town. So.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll just say, since I asked the question, that I'm fine with not requiring anything additional. I think it would be very obvious that it would comply if it needed to, and it doesn't feel like that extra effort is worth it in that case. It just feels a bit overly bureaucratic at that point. But if somebody has a different opinion, please speak up.
All right, I'm speaking up a lot. This is Peter again.
That's okay.
I'm not arguing for a stormwater management plan, but I think we should have some operation and maintenance plan submitted. Just so
For the rain gardens?
for the rain gardens.
That's a really good point.
Because that's what we care about in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's a very good catch. I would completely agree with that. Okay, then we'll move on to 6. This was already discussed a little bit about the berm appearing to extend into the rain gardens. I think this would be an opportune time for the commission to talk about that area, basically. Assuming that the commission, agrees to approve the work, and we can, talk about that as well. If anyone has a strong opinion on these options here, you could say it now. So I do have one comment on this. I'll just say the option in blue with the blue option. I'm not sure how we could permit that, given that it would require the removal of naturally vegetated areas in the inner riparian. That's my sort of main concern with it. I understand that it introduces an area where there would be some flooding. And maybe it's just something we have to kind of think about and return to at the end of the discussion, but that was my sort of one thought on it.
So,
Okay.
Can we, let's see, that's on the inside.
So behind the splash pad is the rain garden, and then behind the rain garden, pretty quickly you get into a naturally vegetated area.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah,
whole
so
thing
just-
is in
just to-
riparian.
To point out some things that are very hard to see on this figure, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but this shape right here is the existing rain garden. And then there's an overflow pipe here, but this little, scalloped area is the existing vegetation. So there's almost it's maybe 5 feet between the existing rain garden and where the vegetation and the shrubs and the trees actually start right now. So there's not a lot of space to work something in if you're trying to stay on the river side of the rain garden without affecting the existing vegetation.
Right.
Elise,
Mhm.
on I guess on the east side of this, on the tip of the blue area, where's the gap where we're not tying into the 10-foot contour?
If you were to do the blue shape, you're filling the gap. If you were to do the red shape, the gap is just in here.
Okay. I'm just thinking maybe.
And I didn't realize this, but I think this might be what you're going to say. You could just add a piece right here and kind of let the splash pad be part of the berm.
Yeah, I just put a little stone wall where that blue line is.
Yeah, or something, just a small piece on this end of it.
Well, where does the gap extend from? From where's the 10 end and where's the gap actually? Can you use your pointer?
I don't know that I can with all of these plans on top of itself. This
Yeah,
is,
I know.
but it is somewhere in this region.
All right. I think we ought to consider just, rerouting the berm and then think of some alternative to maintain that 10-foot contour.
Yep.
Thanks, Peter. That's a good suggestion. So number 7, some of the contour lines are missing labels or labels are difficult to read, and these should be added or made clear where obscured. I think that's just I think that one's pretty straightforward.
Yep.
8, the rain garden appears to impact existing trees near the softball field. It may be preferable to eliminate this section of the rain garden in favor of leaving mature trees. Again, I think this kind of gets at the same thing. There's mature trees that are in inner riparian.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we really shouldn't be taking those out. Also, while we're thinking about trees, there's a memorial bench and a memorial tree in the work area, and I'm a little concerned that the berm might interfere with those, and that would be something that would want to make sure was acceptable to move those if it came to that. If it was, I mean, I don't know if it would be possible for the tree or not. So that's just something that.
Yep, so I can speak to that a little bit. So any of the trees that are in the footprint of the rain garden, which are the trees that are more visible on the plan as it is right now, we could work around that. We could basically reduce, in the same way that there are gaps in the rain garden and other places, we could put a gap in the rain garden to basically not impact these trees. There are, however, a couple trees here and here, which are very difficult to see on this plan, but there is a shape right here and a shape right here and one right here. This is happening because right now the existing path runs so close to the edge of the bank that once we pull the bank back and then have room for that 3-to-1 slope on the front side of the berm, we have to move the path back just a few feet, and there are currently trees right at the edge of the existing path. So this is another one of those questions for the commission where if it's unacceptable to remove any of these trees, then the berm is probably not possible. If we could remove, I think there are 3 trees in the footprint of the relocated path in this location. If we could mitigate for that with additional tree planting, that might work, and we could save the trees in this area. As for the memorials and the bench, I'm not sure exactly where those are on this plan. That would be something that we would have to locate to see what portion of our footprint may or may not be impacting them directly. And it may be necessary to ask whether or not it would be possible to relocate some of those memorials a little bit farther landward. But so those are some issues that we hadn't considered up until very recently. So we don't have a great plan for how to answer that right now. But I think the trees within the path footprint, the berm doesn't work if it can't be where it is. So those are kind of a go, no go kind of question, whereas we can definitely work around some of the other trees that are in the rain garden footprint.
Okay. Well, thank you for the information that you could provide. It seems to me that maybe we should just finish the questions and kind of see how the discussion goes and as to whether that's ends up being a sticking point or not. I mean, there's having the berm move further away than the existing path allows that opportunity, there's a small opportunity there for some restoration of that area and some native vegetation. I certainly feel like there's room for other trees to be planted. But anyways, as I said, maybe we'll just continue for now and come back to it as needed. So then there's a discrepancy, number 9, discrepancy between the revegetation protocol document and the rain garden planting detail on the plans, and that should be clarified. And that was the details that were earlier. Do you know what that's referring to, Elise?
I do.
Okay,
it
so
took me
there
a little
was-
while to track it down.
Yeah,
but it's,
so the revegetation protocol, one of them mentions, I think it's the narrative mentions black-eyed Susan and blue vervain, whereas the other references, I want to say fragrant sumac or
yep, bayberry and fragrant sumac.
and bayberry. That's it. Yeah. So, what was intended there of those two?
All 4 of them, actually.
Oh, okay.
So 2 got put in one place and 2 got put in the other. But so my preference, if given the option to revise this, would be to have all 4 mentioned in both locations. But ultimately, either would be effective or both together. It's sort of an aesthetic thing. The black-eyed Susan and the blue vervain would add some color to an otherwise pretty grassy field. The fragrant sumac's pretty colorful in the fall and is pretty low maintenance. So our recommendation is to include all 4, but we would defer to the preference of the commission. So if there were some plants of that group that you preferred for one reason or the other, we'd be happy to edit it that way as well.
Okay. Well, I'll speak up. I do have an opinion. Generally, more species diversity is better. So I like seeing, all of them. However, black-eyed Susan is not, as much as I love it, it's not native. So I would suggest that, see if there's a similar herbaceous plant with some color that's a native that could go in.
I have a thought.
Yeah, sure.
And I didn't think of this until we started talking about an O&M for the rain garden, and the town is very limited in its capacity to maintain things like rain gardens. Sunset Lake has rain gardens that are, it's not like the DPW was going to go out and weed and know what's a weed and what was planted in the rain garden. And I've heard it said in, workshops and things like the simpler, the better. That might be a factor. And I know Cindy is the stormwater manager is on the call. She might have some thoughts about that, or if not now, we could discuss a little more about, what's it realistic for the town to maintain.
Excellent point. I have actually seen this with my own eyes where the simpler plant palette did work better. So unless Cynthia wants to comment now, I think I'd be okay with you just discussing it later
I'm
on.
Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Hi Kelly, hi Heather.
Hello, welcome.
I think I'm happy to talk to Kelly about it, but she's absolutely right that that kind of very particular maintenance is not something that is in the toolbox of the DPW at the moment. I am hoping with some of the positions that are meant to be added to the stormwater division that we might be able to either train or encourage people to learn about how that might be accomplished so that a foreman could be present and directing people about the maintenance. But that's probably a couple of years down the road. So my vote would be the simpler the better as well.
Thanks, Cynthia. That's very helpful. And with that, my preference would be to certainly include at least some, if not all, woody species then, because they're easier to see. They get trampled less. They, are in some ways sort of easier to prune and not just remove the whole plant. At least the bayberry seems to make sense. But it could be a couple of species. And as a side note, Cynthia, I'm happy to hear you say that you actually feel like that might be a possibility in the near future. In a couple of years, a few years, that actually sounds great to me, as opposed to it never being a possibility. So,
well, I will say, in case you're not aware of it, there was a stormwater fee increase in FY21. So that's expanded the budget a bit.
Got it. Okay, good to know. Okay, I'll move on to just a few more of these comments. Straightforward one on erosion control. Proposed is a staked sill fence, and staff is suggesting a straw wattle or compost filter tube be used. Any reason that could not be done, Elise?
I don't think so. You're speaking, I'm assuming, on the river side of the berm construction area?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'll throw out that my preference would be the compost filter tube, because there's less chance of, if it's an actual straw wattle, great, but otherwise with any sort of hay products, there's a chance of spreading invasive seeds and plant parts, which is particularly not desirable in a coastal setting. Okay, so 11 gets to the staging and stockpiling areas. This was already talked about for the last project, so I don't think we need to talk any further. And then finally 12, Coastal Zone Management, or CZM's comment letter, states the proponent should consider potential impacts that stormwater collected in the rain garden may have on the structural integrity of the earthen berm. And this should be addressed.
Yeah, so I did ask our engineers what their thoughts on this was and whether or not we felt there was any, sorry, I'm lost on my plan here, whether they felt there was any potential for the structure of the berm to be impacted by water in the rain garden. And the answer is not really. I mean, the rain garden is not intended to hold water for a really long period of time. The water will either drain out through the pipe or percolate through the soil. If there was a concern, this Filtrex compost erosion blanket that we're proposing to do could be carried up the field side of the berm to sort of create a little bit more continuity, I guess, between the rain garden and the berm. But that would be, we don't think that's necessary, but if that would add a level of comfort, we could add that detail in.
Okay. Seems reasonable to me to add it, if you know the detail.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that concludes Kelly's memo here. Is there anything specific that you wanted to add at this time, Kelly?
I would ask, from where I stand, I think the salt marsh and the bank stabilization part of the project is actually there's less for the commission to consider. It's kind of straightforward, and I'm hoping if we get the plan revisions that it would be all right for me to draft conditions for the next meeting so that part can keep moving because there's other permitting involved with that. The berm, I think it's critical that we get to that point by the next meeting because it's upland. I don't think the berm requires any additional permitting, but is that true, Elise?
I think so. Actually, Callie Roberts is actually on the call too. Callie, can you chime in? Is that true that the berm is not part of our Army Corps permit that we're putting together?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So if it had to be more discussion and more time for the commission to consider the berm and rain garden application, that would not actually slow down the next steps of permitting we have to do with the agencies through our current CZM grant.
Okay, thanks for that information. And thanks for that input as well, Kelly. Okay.
Can I ask just one question?
Sure.
On the response to that last question, number 12, can we just get something in writing from their engineers? Because CZM seems more concerned with the coastal zone, with the structural integrity of the earthen berm.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I can, with the added note, with the added detail on the plan, we can add a note saying why it's there, and that will basically eliminate any adverse impact from water ponding in the rain garden from impacting the structural integrity of the berm itself. So
Yeah.
if would that be sufficient?
I think the CZM is looking at water going under the berm, but the berm is on the existing grade, right?
Yes.
So I don't think it's going to be an issue, but I just
Yeah.
like an
Yeah, my engineers didn't think it was an issue either.
No, and so I mean, what the question is the water seeping under the berm going to cause it to destabilize and slide?
Correct.
And I think that's the response we need.
Yep.
I don't think it's a concern either, but we should have that in writing.
Okay.
Thanks. And thanks, Elise. So in light of what Kelly just said, commissioners, is there anyone that is opposed to or has a comment on Kelly going ahead with the draft conditions for the next meeting on the shoreline stabilization and salt marsh restoration portion of the project?
Nope.
Okay, so as before, I guess maybe I'll just wait to make that motion until we're totally done with our discussion in case something else comes up. But I think I agree as well. And then, so let's talk further if people have other questions about the berm project. I mean, I think there's, in my mind, more to consider in terms of, whether, do we actually want, this project to move forward? There's pros and cons in my mind. I think it's a little bit difficult, frankly. It's not a definite in my mind, but I can appreciate the benefits and all of the incredible work that's gone into getting to this point. So questions or comments from the commission?
What is the cost of the berm project? Construction.
I have that. I don't have that off the top of my head. But we did do a estimated construction cost for the town as part of this current contract, specifically so that Kelly and the town can start looking at fundraising and starting to get that in line, because even if they were to continue to get CZM grants in the future, there is a match associated with that that the town would need to put forward. Yeah. And the berm portion of that came to approximately 120,000, with the rain garden being sort of at 70-ish thousand, out of a total project cost of 670. And those are just estimates. I mean, we're not the contractor. Obviously, this would have to go out to bid.
Obviously. Are you saying the berm walkway is plus the separate cost? The berm doesn't include the rain garden?
Correct. So the berm, the fill and the walkway material and the construction equipment required to put in just that berm would be approximately 120,000, and then you wouldn't, if you didn't have a berm, you wouldn't put in the rain garden, but the rain garden would be an additional 70. So that's an
Okay.
approximately 190
Yeah, 200.
for the berm rain garden combo.
Yeah, okay. I actually had one question I forgot about the berm it's going to be all handicap accessible
Yes.
and the
So
surface?
it should be the grade coming up from the existing path to that 10-foot elevation will be in an appropriate grade for handicap accessibility. The surface was requested from CZM to remain some kind of a crushed stone, crushed shell, gravel type thing, but that is not, the actual specifications of that are not, I don't have those specifications, but I would hope that we found something that would be ADA compliant in addition to also being pervious.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the intention.
Yeah, I'd be adamant that it has to be ADA
Yep.
compliant.
Yeah, I think that was what we were working with.
That's a good suggestion, Peter. Okay. I think I'd like to make a comment myself about the berm project in general. As I sort of hinted at, I'm struggling with it a little bit. I don't want to belittle all the work that's gone into it and the different agencies, the grant money that's been involved. I see the clear benefits in terms of the recreational use of the fields. I understand the desire to sort of become more resilient in the face of climate change and protect what you have. But I also think that it's important to consider the fact that there are other ways to handle climate change. You know, we don't have to necessarily block off the ocean. We could allow the marsh to migrate when it's ready to migrate, and accept that there's some level of flooding. I like the idea of a berm that would get taken down. I just don't have a lot of confidence that, you know, who's going to be around to be sure that that's going to happen. You know, I feel like it's going to be very, very hard to then convince people to take that down. I think instead the conversation would be, well, can we make it bigger or wider? What else can we do to protect the field? And I get that desire. And I know this would probably not be a popular viewpoint to bring up with a lot of the people that, you know, want to see this go in, and I get that. But if any group is going to bring this question up, it seems to me that it would be the Conservation Commission, you know, to at least consider. I mean, there are ways to adapt to climate change as opposed to, you know, in sort of retreat, managed retreat, or, you know, take less drastic measures. And I realize that there could be even more drastic measures than a berm, admittedly. So I just think it's something that I'd be curious to know if anyone else felt similarly, or had any concerns like that. It's definitely not easy when you're looking at these sort of projects. I wish the return on investment was a little bit longer. 10 years is not that long before we start seeing, you know, some flooding. I kind of thought that we might have some other departments. I know we have, you know, stormwater management here, but I thought we might hear some other advocates from the town for the project. But I understand from Kelly's that we haven't gotten any specific comments. Anyways, so I open that to the commission discussion. The last point I'll make is just that I'm also being very cognizant of the resource areas and their values. And so I don't know that the berm necessarily enhances those values per se. It certainly helps to avoid flooding, but that's not necessarily, you know, the land subject coastal storm flowage is intended to absorb those floodwaters as is. You know, I don't think that the berm necessarily changes that in a sense. I'm not sure if that made sense, but I don't know that enhances that value. It simply sort of stops the flooding. It doesn't actually allow that land to absorb those floodwaters. So it's not necessarily a positive from that standpoint. In terms of riverfront area, as long as vegetation removal is totally avoided, and anything that, if it was just scattering trees could be, replanted at a 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 ratio or something like that. I think I could get I think I could get behind that. But anyways, I think I've said enough, but I would be very interested. I'd be very interested to know if commissioners had some input on this, or if anyone shared my concern / question about the climate change, issue.
Could I respond to that?
Sure. And, oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
A couple things you said. One was you're not sure if it adds to the resource area values. I would say that it does take away some of the lawn that's there right now. The whole riverside surface of the berm will be more of a native wild meadow grassland type environment. So you certainly have a bit more of a natural buffer to the river than is what is currently there right now. So that would be a benefit to the habitats. And I would say I do agree with you that I would love to see that park as a beautiful salt marsh estuary in 50 years. But what we really found in part of the feasibility study we did for the town 2 years ago was really looking at what is the possibility of that? When could salt marsh actually get there? And Woods Hole Group has previously done a statewide project for the Coastal Zone Management Agency, looking at how coastal wetlands across the entire state's coastline would likely migrate given sea level rise. And we were able to bring those results to bear on this project and show that given the projected water level changes, it's not likely that you'll see any kind of habitat conversion until at least the point where mean high water gets over 8 feet and starts interacting with the park surface. And so you have basically no salt marsh migration up until that point because it's sort of hemmed in by that coastal bank. But at that point, because it's so flat, your potential marsh area becomes very large. Because once the water gets to a certain level, it can flood a very large area. And the intention always was with this berm for it to be temporary and removable at the point where that water level got there. Now we're saying 2070, but that's the projection based on a high sea level rise scenario. If sea level rise happens faster than that, that could be sooner. If sea level rise happens much slower than that, maybe you get to 2100 before the field could ever be marsh in the first place. But the intention is always when the water gets to that tipping point, with 2070 being the general planning horizon, that the berm does come out. I don't know how you make that happen. 50 years is a long time. Most of the town staff won't still be this town staff then. So I do recognize the conundrum with that. But I guess I would ask the commission to focus on the portions of the berm project that actually are tripping some of the Wetland Protection Act issues. So I don't think salt marsh migration is really part of that, although it is something I truly do want to plan for. I think the trees are truly an issue. How do we either avoid them or mitigate for them? Because there are mature trees in that buffer zone in that riverfront area that I would like to protect as many of them as possible. And I'm not sure if there are other components like that we can address. But I'm not sure if long-term planning is really part of the Wetlands Protection Act to be a reason to rule on the project one way or the other.
Thank you for the response. And I will say, yeah, my comment about resource areas and the interest of the act was sort of more focused on flooding. I do appreciate that there would be some habitat improvement. We have in our bylaw regulations, we do have climate change adaptation discussed relative to the buffer zone. So there's a bit of a tie in there, specifically climate. I now I've forgotten if I just said climate change or climate change adaptation, but in any case, there is some connection there. But you make some good points. I mean, certainly a perpetual condition is possible. And I would advocate if the project moves forward for, to have the educational component in it at this stage or conditioned in detail, because I feel like an educational component that's very visible and very prominent will help set the stage, so that people know that this is coming down someday, and in some manner perhaps hold the town to what was agreed upon. Those are the two things I could think of that might help with the long term.
And in our initial feasibility study, and this is outside of, I guess, the scope of this permit, but we recommended to the town that they start now looking for alternative ball field locations. Like, how can you do field sharing with neighboring towns? Can you start acquiring land over the long term that'll ultimately lead to a space big enough to have these fields relocated? You can't wait until 2070 to find a new ball field. If you start thinking now, this transition could actually happen. So it's a bigger town planning exercise, but it's one that I think is totally possible over the scale of time that's available.
Yeah. Okay, commissioners, there's a lot of silence. I need some opinions. I still would be interested in if anyone else had, similar concerns. Understanding that, those are excellent responses, and I just think it's a difficult one. If all of us, were similarly concerned, that could make a difference in my mind. If I'm kind of the only one who, then that also makes a difference, and that's okay. And I get it if you haven't made your mind up and you just don't want to speak up. I understand that too. I'm not going to call on people like.
Well, I would say that I think the flood protection to the field is, something that is of value to the town, and as you say, if we, the town has some forethought, they could plan to relocate these fields in the future. But I mean, if we do nothing, we're going to lose the fields earlier. One thing I would like, if I could, meet with Kelly out at the site and look over some of these issues with the trees and rerouting of the area, so that we can get back to Elise on what may be the solution and by the splash pad.
This is Chris. I could also add that some of those trees down there, they're just volunteer species, and we were there last weekend, and one of them, the night of the storm, and one of them split right in half. I mean, so some of those trees probably, could be removed just for the fact that they've never been maintained, really. So it's something that, we're looking at little shapes on the plan right now, but some of those trees are probably not in the best shape currently. So maybe, strategic planting going forward, with a 50-year plan, something in another place could even protect the berm potentially.
Great, good suggestions and input. Absolutely.
And this is Kim. My sort of, I won't call it early reaction since we've been talking about it for a while this evening, but my reaction would be that the berm is somewhat of a softer approach to protecting the fields. And as you had mentioned, there could be a more extensive protection that was put into place, and where that wasn't the approach here. It's more of a softer arrangement that could potentially move with the land. It seems like it makes a lot of sense to look at the berm as a solution for moving forward at this time.
Great, thanks very much for the input. That's helpful.
This is Diane. I agree. And one of the things I liked about the berm project is the erosion was quite terrible along some of the shoreline. And also there were pipes that needed to be given some consideration because they were deteriorating on the ends. They were broken. So I think that's helpful.
Thanks for that input too. That's helpful. It would definitely be worth looking at that as well. Okay. This seems like a good time to open it to the public. And I see, again, we have someone that's raised their hand. So Kelly, if you could unmute people and we'll take any questions or comments.
Hello.
Yes, is this Robert Kearns again?
Yes, can I go
Okay,
through the chair?
yes, please go ahead.
I think that one question I had was, is there a way that you could put a condition that there has to be a discussion about removal of the berm at some time? Or is that decision have to be made in the future? That was one question. And then the other one I had was, if the berm doesn't go in front of the splash pad, is the splash pad fine, or would that be not protected? I don't know.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll comment on the first part of your question. We do have the ability to put perpetual or ongoing conditions in our permits. So there could be some sort of a condition that requires that the berm come out. They're usually things like ongoing maintenance or prohibiting chemicals or something like that. So I'm not certain exactly how we would phrase it, but I think that we could do it from a regulatory standpoint. That would be something that we'd have to dig a little deeper into to be certain and decide how to phrase it. But I think that would be possible. And Elise, can you answer the question with regard to the splash pad and its protection?
Can. So I believe the platform itself of the splash pad is at 11 feet elevation. And so it's actually already higher than the berm that we're proposing. So the sort of the earthen mound that the splash pad sits on is already essentially a berm that's doing the same thing. And we were hoping basically to tie into that with what we're doing. So it just matters if we tie into one side of it or hook all the way around to the other side. There is a small low point between the splash pad and the next baseball field. It's really what it comes down to, and how do we close off that low point? And I don't know why I didn't have an option C in the figure that I presented to the commission tonight, but you could have the red option that curls on the west side of the thing, and then just a small fill component on the eastern side of the splash pad without ever going around the rain garden, because the splash pad itself becomes that berm.
That sounds like a good option to me as well, and maybe the least disruption in the riverfront area as well.
Yeah, and I think that may have been what Peter was suggesting, that something could just be placed on that other side, and then you wouldn't have to go in front of the rain garden in the first place.
Okay, that makes sense, and I think that is a good option. A follow-up on that, is there any like electronical stuff that would be impacted by water that's below grade in the splash pad? I don't know. Or is it all fine up above the wall?
I don't know that anyone on this call is going to know the answer to that. I see Elise shaking her head. Yeah, I think that might be a question for the recreation department. I believe is one that maintains that. I am not sure either.
Okay. And then the other comment I just had was, I think that, there's talk about, the master plan, and I think it's a great time when the town's doing a master plan now or near future to be having these discussions about, where are we going to move this stuff, by 2070, and try to think about that. I think that's a great thought. And then going back to the other thing before I got to hop off, it may be effective with respect to the restored salt marsh area, going back to the other part, to do more fencing there. That was my thought, but thank you. It's definitely an interesting project.
Great, thank you so much for your comments. Appreciate it. Anyone else from the public that wants to comment or ask a question? Okay, seems not. Okay, any final thoughts or questions from the commission? Okay. I had one or two other things that I had forgotten to mention earlier. So on the field side of the berm, it was proposed to be planted with sort of more turf grasses that would be mowed. Is there any reason why it couldn't be planted with native grasses in the same way that the riverside is being planted?
No, I think when we originally proposed that planting scheme, we didn't have a rain garden because that was our original plan, and it was meant to be easier for the groundskeepers to maintain, where they could just mow that slope in the same way that they're mowing the field, and people could come up onto the path from any place really that they wanted. Adding the rain garden in really means that wherever there's a rain garden, you really shouldn't be walking up that part of the slope anyway, because you'd be traipsing through the rain garden. So we could make it such that the portions between the rain garden and the path get planted with more of a native grass mix, and the portions that are more open would be more accessible. So folks aren't limited to these little tiny points to get up onto the path. They could kind of walk up the side slope like you would a grassy hill, which was our original intention, to create more public access. So you're not just limited to the two ends of the path. But I think it would be absolutely appropriate to change the grass mix between the rain garden and the top of the berm.
Great. Okay, thanks. And the last thing that I was just going to return, I mentioned education a whole bunch of times, but what I realize I don't understand is whether any of the specifics about an educational component can be incorporated now. And this may be a question for Kelly as much as for you, Elise, because I'm sure funding is involved in the scope of what your actual work is. Or if that would be something that we would condition, or how we can sort of ensure that happens. I mean, obviously it'd be great to get something specific now, but I realize that might not be possible.
You want to take that one, Kelly?
I'm imagining, I was never really part of your scope, part of the Woods Hole Group scope to come up with the educational, signage or program or plan. So it's, realistically, I'd say it's the town. And we don't, we don't have that now. So I would want to condition it and kind of give it some thought over the next month or two.
So we'd essentially condition that you would do it later, Kelly. Giving you more work. Okay, at least we know you're very supportive of this idea. Okay, I don't have anything else. It sounds like the commission is generally in favor of moving forward. I think we've given a fair amount of homework to the consultant, but at least thanks for all your time. I'll just give an opportunity for any final thoughts before making a couple motions. If anyone else want to say anything? Okay.
I had one quick question for Elise. Elise, could I get a PDF of that study you did on this salt marsh restoration for the state?
Yes, I can send, I will send Kelly the link and she can forward it to the commission, perhaps.
Okay.
It's all up online on CZM's website right now, and I believe the data layers are actually now accessible through an online mapper. So you can zoom in and out and drive all around.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And along that vein, I think it would be great, Kelly, if you could send that to the whole commission, because I would also be interested. And if you guys make a site visit, I realize it's very difficult to coordinate a site visit with the whole commission, just due to schedules and due to the current health situation. But I'd also be interested in coming down possibly at the same time. If you don't mind company and you want to share when you're going. It's one of my favorite places in town, so I don't mind an excuse to go there. Okay, so I think we're ready for some motions on this one. And last thing I wanted to say is just thank you again to everyone involved. I know they're not all on this call, but both of these projects, have had a lot of different agencies, staff, representatives, town staff involved, and I really appreciate all the work. I think very early on in my time in the commission, Kelly and I we've basically been talking about this particular area of salt marsh and rocky intertidal and when and how it could be restored for years now. And I'm sure it's been on the radar of Kelly and the town for well before that too. So I'm very excited to see this happening finally. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make a motion to continue both of these hearings. So first would be to continue the public hearing for notice of intent DEP file number 8-681 Gordon Road, Watson Park, the town of Braintree for the bank and salt marsh work to our next meeting on September 3rd, and direct Kelly to prepare draft conditions for that order. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Francis. I'll now take a roll call vote. Commissioner Hayward?
Yay.
Commissioner Crowe?
I got
Commissioner
us on
Crowell?
mute. Yay.
I figured as much. Commissioner Albrecht
Yay.
and Commissioner Williams.
Yay.
Okay, it's unanimous 6-0-0. And next I'll make a motion to continue the notice of intent for DEP file number 8-682 for Gordon Road Watson Park for the town of Braintree for the berm work and rain gardens to our next meeting on September 3rd. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Francis. Commissioner Hayward,
Yay.
Commissioner Crowe,
Yay.
Commissioner Albrecht,
Yay.
and Commissioner Williams.
Yay.
Okay, unanimous again, 6-0-0. Thank you very much. Okay. And I'm cognizant of the time, but fortunately that is the end of our public hearings. We are moving on to other business. We have 2 requests for a certificate of compliance. Staff memos were sent out just recently. So the first request for a certificate of compliance for DEP 8-674, 201 Commerce Drive, Mars Scaffolding Company. I don't know if everyone had a chance to look these over yet. I believe this is the one that the recommendation is to issue a partial. But why don't I just say if any, am I getting that correct?
Oh, no, for,
Needs more information.
yeah, I need more information. The
Sorry,
recommendation
I'm
for
mixing the 2 up. I apologize.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry about that. And I know that we actually got something from the representative late this afternoon.
Yes, they're on the
and
call, so.
Are they on the call? Okay.
Yeah.
So then in that case, I'll invite them to speak up at this time.
Sure, I'll speak up quickly. This is Carlos Sculte with Civil and Environmental Consultants on behalf of the Marr Companies. I believe Dan Marr is also on the line here as well, or was planning to be.
Welcome,
just
thank
want-
you.
How's the
Yes, I
board?
am yes, I am present.
All right, I'll just add off to say that we did provide the requested certification for the condition 33 of the order of conditions requesting the signed stamped documentation indicating that we believe that the stormwater management system was installed per the plans and should function as designed. I know that was one of the items that was flagged in Ms. Phelan's initial recommendation to you. And then I believe the Marr Company submitted additional documentation a little bit later this afternoon. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you if you'd like to walk through the additional material that was submitted.
Well, I do believe that Dan Marr here, CEO of the Marr Company. I do believe, having received Kelly Phelan's comments, that Dave Hughes made an attempt to look at each of those comments and address them singularly one by one, looking towards the objective that we have, and that objective is to go to a full certificate of occupancy so that we can work our final mortgage for our Braintree project. We can't fulfill our mortgage right now until such time as the C of O is completed. So I think that we have attempted to, we've had a wonderful working relationship with Braintree in every department that we've worked with. And I'm hoping that Dave Hughes' submittal of today addresses that to the satisfaction that the committee might see fit to, allow us a full certificate of occupancy in that order that we can proceed. And to further that point, we were willing to, anything that has been asked of us, I like to think that we've fully cooperated in doing so and demonstrated that with what we've produced. And one last thing, there are some bonds that have been applied to this project, and we will allow them, we would be happy to allow them to stand until such time as it's been fully documented that we're in compliance with all of Concom's wishes and any other wishes that might be put forth, whether it be with the fire department. I believe we have really achieved a level of understanding and commitment and fulfillment. And I'll wait to see. I not having talked to Kelly, I don't know what her feelings are with relationship to David's letter, which I approved this afternoon.
Are you still there, Dan?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay. I maybe missed the last thing that you said.
Well, I was hoping that maybe Kelly could respond to David Hughes's letter, which is pretty much to try to satisfy any last remaining issues that might act as an obstacle to our getting a certificate of occupancy. Our banking situation and relationship in mortgage sort of counts on that happening, and sooner rather than later. I think we've been in a temporary for 2 months now, I believe.
Okay, thank you for the, well, thank you both for your patience in waiting through the earlier part of the agenda and for being here, the meeting. I'm sorry I missed the end of what you said. It actually appears that my internet connection was temporarily unstable. So on the unfortunate chance that I do get disconnected, I will phone back in immediately. So hopefully that will not happen.
Okay.
It's always nice when we get a response in writing. It was received rather late for this meeting. So Kelly, I want to come to you first and find out if you've had a chance to look at the letter. And if, I mean, I think I'm guessing your recommendation is going to stand because it wasn't just based on information that could be provided in response, but also in seeing how the plants do. But I would love your input. The other thing that I think needs to be clarified is you're mentioning the certificate of occupancy, which is issued by the building department. And we would be issuing a certificate of compliance, which just relates to the wetlands permit. And I'm not sure if that affects your mortgage or if that's a separate issue. And so Kelly, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think maybe we should go by the issues one by one. Some of them are, I'm not willing to say this is fine. I mean, there was a condition that was specific, and it's maybe something the commission should weigh in on, is if it's that, if they consider the condition satisfied.
Thank you for that. I agree. I'm just going to say right now that I have not had a chance to look over the letter, and I'd like to do so carefully and just, give it the attention it deserves.
Sure.
I do my best to prepare, but it's not always possible the day of the meeting. So my opinion would be that I really want to look at that. It also seems worth mentioning here that the condition of the bioretention basin, I think, is really important because, I was on the commission when this project was permitted, and the commission doesn't often do this, but we did allow a small, sort of lower quality isolated vegetated wetland to be filled in. And part of the impetus was that this extensive bioretention and infiltration basins would be installed and would have, a large diversity of species and provide a lot of habitat value, and in some ways replace some of what was being lost. So in particular in this case, I mean, it's always important from a stormwater standpoint, but in particular in this case, I think it's really important to make sure that they are functioning and working well. Right now is a really tough time given the drought conditions, but I feel like that's all the more reason to make sure that come this fall, things have survived, and if not, address that. And that would mean sort of holding off on issuing. Any other commissioners want to chime in? Yeah.
Yes, Chris. This is Chris. Yeah, I mean, if I'm reading Kelly's note here that there isn't any type of 2-year guarantee on the plantings, but that they're supposed to at least maintain and replace ones that are in tough shape, and that hasn't been done. So this is not the time to be doing that right now. So, you'd really want to, before we issue a certificate of compliance, make sure that those plants are established.
Thanks for the input. I would agree. And anyone else? Okay.
I'd like to comment before we.
Yeah, you can definitely respond. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Dan Marr again. Well, the plantings that we had done in order to satisfy the requirements were all done with the intentions of them being fully compliant and suitable. unfortunately, we've all lived through a pretty significant drought, hot weather, and so forth. And some of the plantings have been compromised, if you will, and certainly will be replaced. We have, as I said before, I don't want to get redundant here, anything that is asked of us or anything that is needed or anything that we want, we're certainly taking very positive steps to do that and to do that as quickly as possible. I agree with the last gentleman who pointed out that now is perhaps not the time to do it because we don't know about what the survival rate is or is not, and that will be known in the weeks to come as the weather changes. But we do have guarantees, if you will, talking about guarantees with our arborists, that any non-survivors will be replaced, and that was guaranteed back to us. But for us to not, I don't know whether the Concom's authorization to us has any impact on our getting a certificate of occupancy when we have another meeting before the planning board on Tuesday. I don't know the connection of the bearings between the two, but what I am concerned about a little bit is our relationship, not so much our relationship with our bank, but they've been encouraging us and urging us, and we will suffer some difficulties, with our banking system and our objective of trying to get a full mortgage on our property.
Okay. This does come up from time to time that there are challenges usually related to a sale. Sometimes we have flexibility, and sometimes we don't. I don't know the connection with the certificate of occupancy. I'm not sure if conservation staff signs off on that.
No,
I don't think so. I didn't think so. So it's really a separate issue from conservation, and I don't, we have to look at it very much from a standpoint of making sure the conditions are all met. And I appreciate that the intention is to meet them and that you're trying to be responsive, which is great. That's always a real positive. I don't feel like this one is ready for a certificate of compliance. And certainly we will all want to look over the letter carefully and consider the information. But our staff is recommending not issuing the certificate of compliance until the fall, so that, in addition to the items that you may have already addressed in the letter, that we can see the condition of that's the end of the growing season, see the condition of the shrub. So I would be supportive of staff's recommendation and just continue this item until that time. Anyone else? Any other commissioners? I see some nods, some ponderings. Kelly, were you envisioning that we would continue it then until that time, until September or October or something?
Yeah, I mean, we could put it back on for September. I'm not sure the shrub situation would change much, but give you, some time to consider the other issues.
Yeah,
minor issues, but I don't. When there's a specific condition, I want to point out to you when it's not completely addressed. So.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Any other thoughts from the commission on this? Okay. Then I'm just going to suggest that we continue it until the next meeting. That way, in part because then if there is anything additional that we need on the other items, we can give Dan and his team more time to deal with that rather than waiting another month, even though we may still feel like we need to wait another month in terms of the plants. That way it can try to tie up any other loose ends if there are any. So having said that, I'm going to make a motion to continue this item until our next meeting. The request for certificate of compliance, DEP 8-674 for 201 Commerce Drive, to our next meeting on September 3rd. Is there a second?
Second.
That was Peter, yes?
No?
It was Diane again.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. My audio cut out for a second. So your voices do indeed sound very different. Thank you, Commissioner Francis. Commissioner Hayward.
Yay.
Commissioner Crowe.
Yay.
Commissioner Albrecht,
Yay.
and Commissioner Williams.
Yay.
Okay, it's unanimous, 600. We'll see you in a month. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you.
And next we have a request for certificate of compliance for DEP 8-491 for 141 Messina Woods Drive. Applicant is Ty. And on this one, Kelly is recommending that we issue a partial certificate of compliance since it's a question of one lot that's ready in a subdivision and the rest are not all entirely ready. I don't have anything else to add or questions. Does anyone else? Okay, hearing nothing. I will go ahead and make a motion to issue a partial certificate of compliance for DEP 8-491, 141 Messina Woods Drive. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Francis. Commissioner Hayward,
Yay.
Commissioner Crowe,
Yay.
Commissioner Albrecht,
Yay.
Commissioner Williams.
Yay.
Okay, it's unanimous, 600. Next, Eaton's Pond area update. Kelly is gonna tell us about something going on out there.
Yep, I had on my screen, I don't know if it's worth sharing it again, but there's further down at Eaton's Pond, we have the main entrance where as you come in, you can park there and the kiosk is there at the trailhead. There's some other spur paths that come in further down, and the furthest one, you actually have to cross over the railroad tracks to get to it, but apparently there's been an issue with I don't know, some kind of off-road vehicles or Jeeps driving over the railroad tracks and into the trail at that point. The ranger would like to construct a barrier. He's collected some stones around the site and would like to mortar them together so they can't be easily taken apart to prevent a vehicle from driving down the spur trail. So I think it's roughly 10 feet long by 2 feet wide by 2 feet high.
Okay, and it is in the buffer zone, I think you said, to
It is in the buffer zone, yeah.
PW. Do you have a sense for how far away it is?
If it's right at the beginning part of the trail, it's probably 60 feet from the wetland. I think he wanted to set it back a little bit. For some reason, it's escaping me right now. So in that case, it would be closer. But it's already, it's already a spur trail. It's like, almost like a fire road.
It's
So it's
established, so it's a legitimate trail.
yeah.
Would it allow accessibility still? Could somebody go around the ends of it?
Yeah.
Have a little more space to do so? Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioners, any thoughts on this one? It doesn't, I wouldn't think, so the question at hand is just whether the commission would be comfortable with our ranger doing that work.
I was going to say that thank the ranger for catching this.
Yep.
Yeah, agreed.
How big are the rocks is he gonna move? I mean, how is he moving them?
He had some help with the ranger from Pond Meadow, and I think they just muscled them.
Okay. I can give it a shot. They may not last, but we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, the mortaring that could make a big difference.
Oh, is this gonna be mortared together?
That was his request was to mortar it so that it couldn't be easily disassembled,
Okay,
which does happen even with large boulders.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But there is some way to get around the side? I mean, are these legal trails that go off beyond this wall?
They're on the trail map.
They're on the
So,
trail, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they probably shouldn't, this one in particular, I wish it hadn't been created because I kind of knew it was going to be a problem for, but it was.
I have to go down there someday.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't hear any objection to it. So,
Well, this is Chris. I have one question about it because I haven't been there. But I know that, in the past there's been some homeless camps in that area. Will this not allow access for, say, the DPW or somebody to go in there and clean out material?
Well, the main trailhead has a gate which can be opened for whatever reason for a vehicle to drive down the main trail. And I don't think we had actually asked the DPW originally if they would put some stones here. And they said they didn't want to drive their dump truck over the railroad tracks. So I'm not sure they would ever be willing to go in that way anyway.
Okay.
Good question though. Okay, do you need a vote on this, Kelly? I mean, I know it's within the buffer zone. It certainly, I don't feel like it needs a filing. It doesn't sound like anybody else does. Do you still want us to vote on it officially, or just?
No, I just kind of
Read
wanted to
enough. Okay.
let you know what's going on.
Thanks for letting us know, and please thank the ranger for us for taking the initiative and doing this work. It's really hard when there's this sort of, access, undesirable access. So this sounds like it's better than any other solution I could think of. So, all right. Last thing is approval of minutes. I had sent along a few corrections. Kelly sent the marked up version with my few, or not corrections, just things suggestions for slight changes. If people got it and looked at it, I won't even bother mentioning what they were. If anybody wants me to, I'll just say what they were. Okay, sounds like everyone's good. I think.
Mhm.
Okay, then I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of July 9th.
We'll second it.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Francis. Commissioner Hayward?
I need to abstain. I was not at that meeting.
Understood. Commissioner Crowe?
Yay.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Yay.
And Commissioner Williams?
Yay.
Okay, it is 5:01, and our next meeting is on September 3rd. Let Kelly know if you can't make it. It'll be Zoom again. And maybe tonight was shorter than the last one. Maybe we'll be even shorter next time. We can hope. I hope everyone stays healthy and well. We are supposed to do the same sort of roll call for our motion to adjourn. So I'll make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Francis, Commissioner Hayward,
Yay.
Commissioner Crowe,
Yay.
Commissioner Albrecht,
Yay.
and Commissioner Williams.
Yay.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Have a good one.
Nice to see
Nice
you.
luck.
Good night.
Well,
See you guys.
Yeah.